created on planet Earth, only 9% has been recycled. 12% has been burned, incinerated, which of course is a very dangerous thing given the products in plastic. And then the remaining 79% is in our landfills, it's in our environment as litter. Unfortunately, much more of it is actually in litter globally than in the landfills. It's estimated that 8 million metric tons of plastics end up in the oceans every year. And the concern is that if the present trends continue, by 2050, it's estimated that there will be 12 billion metric tons of plastic in our landfills. One of the big challenges, well, why is this a problem? Well, one of the big problems is, of course, that durability that makes it so useful for the products that we have. It also makes it so difficult for plastic to biodegrade, right? It very slowly breaks down into microplastics, which are then ingested by fish and other marine animals. Microplastics are found all throughout our oceans, our freshwater ecosystems, our soil, our air. Recent studies have actually found it in bottled water. And we know now that we're on track to having more plastic in our ocean than fish within the next decade or two. We're also familiar with some of the most dramatic images that have been brought to us by National Geographic and others. There was the famous video of that sea turtle with a plastic straw stuck into its nose. We've seen photographs of marine animals mistaking plastic bags for jellyfish. There was just a beautiful but serene, strange images that came out from National Geographic in their special edition last year. And this slide that we see here is just the latest. This literally is from yesterday, 2 days ago. Just this last Friday, the Philippines Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources found a young whale that was weak and vomiting blood. The animal passed within a few hours, and they said, well, what's the deal here? What's going on with this whale? They opened up the whale, and it was extraordinary. In this one animal that was swimming off the coast, they found 88 pounds of plastic, including 16 rice sacks and plastic bags. So this is just one little example. This is one little example of the problem that we have out in our oceans right now. And we're going to be learning a little bit about this issue. We're going to be learning about the plastic pollution in general. We're going to be learning about what can be done. We'll be first hearing, we'll have several panels. The first panel will be giving an overview of plastic pollution. We have Deborah Halberstadt, who's the Executive Director of the Ocean Protection Council, and Dr. Claire Steele, who's Assistant Professor from our Cal State Channel Islands campus. Then we're going to be hearing from Dr. Jeff Boehm, okay, Executive Director of the Marine Mammal Center, who's going to be discussing how plastic pollution has affected our marine life. And we'll also be hearing from Miriam Gordon, Program Director of Upstream. We'll be talking about some of the successful local efforts that are out there addressing plastic pollution, and her organization has been part of. So we'll be starting with an overview, then we'll be looking at local efforts and the impact on marine wildlife. It should be a very informative, and I just hope it's going to be a good experience for all of our members to get their heads around this very, very serious problem that we face as a society. And with that, I'd love to pass the microphone to Senator Stern and see if he has any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's the famous line in The Graduate about the future?
Oh, right, plastics.
You're advising a young person about what to look off. So how little we knew back then. Our future, I think, is going to have to look a lot different if we're going to actually put our ecosystems in a place to survive. I don't want to be the last generation that can surf in an ocean that has life in it. These are tough existential things to get your head around, but they're here. And so today will be sobering. It'll be a downer, potentially, for those of you here. I know you live in this world, so things do feel overwhelming at times. And today is really going to be about scoping this problem and really just sobering up and realizing the scale of what we've got to take on. But I think there are incredible signs of hope around the world. I think our innovation powers are immense to solve this issue. You see in the UK, in the EU, incredibly dramatic steps at multi-state level occurring, but also all the way down to little cities that just want to let their kids go in the ocean and have some sense that it actually is alive and it is feeding us, because it is the key to this planet's survival, and the way we're treating it right now is truly as a landfill. So I appreciate you bringing this this sort of coastal unity here. Folks like to make fun of the coastal representative in this legislature sometimes and say, this is an exceptionalist issue, that the coast is something that is only for the exceptional few. And we know that the vision is that this ocean and this coast is for all in California by law, and hopefully by our practices and our funding and our priorities. But I would hesitate for any kid growing up, say in the entire Southland, to grow up and not realize what actually happens when you throw something away. And things just don't go away. And that's what today's about. It's where do they go? So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's true, the coast really does define California in so many respects. Though I will say, and you brought up the EU, I noticed he just arrived. We're also going to be hearing from the Consul General to Los Angeles, but who serves the entire West Coast on behalf of the government of Austria. So Andreas Launer is a good friend, and he's going to be presenting at the beginning of public comment on some of the fascinating work that's happening in Europe and the zero waste activities happening in the city of Vienna. Not a coastal country, of course, Austria, a mountainous country, but one that I think has taken its environmental stewardship responsibilities very seriously and has some interesting lessons to teach us about what is happening in a vibrant city like Vienna on the issue of waste reduction. And so we're excited to hear from him as well. So other comments or opening remarks from our members? Senator Monning.
Thank you. I just want to thank the co-chairs for convening this. I hadn't planned to say anything, but when you mentioned the subject matter potentially being a downer, yesterday was Ocean Day, Lobby Day up here, and a young woman from Hollister in San Benito County, Shelby O'Neill, was here. She has spearheaded an effort to get rid of plastic straws, and the power of one person organizing. She's succeeded in many cities getting rid of plastic straws, as well as supporting legislation last year that now requires you have to be offered a straw, or you have to request a straw. They're not automatically distributed. But this one young woman's efforts, Delta Airlines no longer provides plastic straws on their flights. So little by little, and I know we'll hear other stories of achievement, but the data is overwhelming. The reality pictures beaches in the Dominican Republic covered every wave set bringing in plastic. So we're kind of behind the curve. I appreciate your convening this, and it's up to us to make the difference. So thank you.
In fact, the chair and I were at a swanky event last night where they had, I couldn't help but notice that all the straws that they were using were entirely biodegradable, and it didn't detract at all from everyone's experience. But by doing what with that leadership that you mentioned, we're now.
You can be swanky without plastic.
You can be swanky without plastic. All right, there you go. Okay, so let's start with our first panel, and we're going to be talking about plastic pollution. First, we have Deborah Halberstadt. So Deborah is the executive director of our Ocean Protection Council. She's also deputy secretary for Oceans and Coastal Policy for the Natural Resources Agency at the state. She has extensive experience in environmental law and policy. She spent 10 years at the Office of the Attorney General, litigating civil and criminal cases to enforce our environmental laws. So I'm sure she has opinions about the last bill we just heard. Received her JD. Most importantly, she got her law degree from UC Berkeley, the best law school in the land. And unfortunately received her Bachelor of Arts from Stanford. And before law school, worked for Governor Gray Davis, actually, handling natural resources and environmental protection resources issues. Fantastic person. We're looking forward to your testimony. Ms. Halberstadt.
Thank you so much, Chairman Allen and Chairman Stern, for inviting me, and all of the senators for hosting this very important topic. I am pleased to be here to talk about the scourge of plastics in our oceans today. Again, I'm the executive director of the California Ocean Protection Council. Oh, yeah, let me get the slides. Let's see. I don't know how to. It just says exit. Oh, but this is not mine. Yeah, no, exit is escape. There we go. So again, I'm the Executive Director of the California Ocean Protection Council and Deputy Secretary of Resources Agency for Ocean and Coastal Matters. And in preparing for this talk, I reflected on a day I spent last year at Coastal Cleanup with my family. And I watched my kids digging through the sand, looking for the little shards of green or red plastic pieces and putting them in the bucket and pulling up those armloads of water bottles. And I thought about how similar their actions were to young turtles or young sea lions or young fish hunting. And the only difference was my kids were not going to be eating that plastic. Every year, our sister agency, the Coastal Commission, hosts a Coastal Cleanup Day, and volunteers spread out across the beaches and the coast to collect trash. And they collect over 800,000 pounds of trash in a single day. This is a really impressive accomplishment. Unfortunately, 18 billion pounds of plastic, or 8 million metric tons, enter the ocean every year. So from hundreds of thousands of tons of ghost fishing gear, derelict fishing gear floating out there, to the billions upon billions of tiny pieces of plastic that are ingested by every level of the food web, from the plankton all the way up to the blue whales, all of the bottles and straws and cups and wrappers and lids in between, we are filling our ocean with plastic. Your other speakers today are going to be talking about the significant impacts of plastic on the marine ecosystem, on human health, and marine animals. It's also important to note that plastic pollution is very expensive. California local communities spend over $400 million a year cleaning up and controlling litter. So my goal this morning is to provide some context and some framing and maybe a little hope around what the state is doing to address the problem. Let's see. I missed that picture, but here we go. So last year in 2018, the California Ocean Protection Council adopted a new California ocean litter strategy, prevention strategy. And this was a strategy that was developed through a very extensive stakeholder-driven process, collaborative, through public participation. And the idea of it is to provide a roadmap for actions the state and our partners can take to address plastic pollution in the ocean over the next several years. The strategy contains 3 primary priorities for OPC. The first is to deal with land-based litter, often referred to as source reduction. The second is to address microplastics and microfibers. And the third is to address derelict fishing gear. There are a variety of ways to prevent litter from reaching the ocean, and the state has really shown leadership on this topic. In 2016, the voters passed Proposition 67, which banned single-use plastic bags in California. Last year, Majority Leader Calderon introduced AB 1884, which again, as was mentioned earlier, requires straws to be provided at sit-down restaurants only upon request. And Senator Allen introduced the sustainable packaging legislation, which requires all food packaging in California state parks and beaches and other state facilities to be reusable, compostable, or recyclable. At OPC, we're also working on a variety of projects, including, for example, funding the Newport Bay Trash Wheel, which is going to be taking floating trash and debris in San Diego Creek before it enters the upper Newport Bay Marine Protected Area and getting all that trash out of the way. The project was based on the very successful Baltimore Mr. Trash Wheel, who actually removes 50,000 pounds of trash a day and has thousands and thousands of social media followers, and has been hugely successful in educating the public about the impacts of trash on wildlife, water quality, and health. And so we're hoping to replicate that with our Newport Bay Trash Wheel. We also funded a program in Alameda to help restaurants reduce their reliance on single-use packaging. So we currently, the project has certified 46 restaurants to be Rethink Disposable, and cumulatively, just the changes made by just 10 of those restaurants, so only 10 restaurants in the 46 pilot restaurants, They've eliminated 1.4 million pieces of single-use disposable foodware packaging every year, and they've saved $45,000 every year. So there's some real projects we can do on the ground to get to this issue locally, but all of our projects need to be thought about scalably. How are we going to bring this up to the state level and have as significant an impact as we can? In terms of microplastics, this is the second prong of our plastic strategy. And Senator Portantino last year introduced SB 1263, which requires OPC to develop a comprehensive microplastics strategy. So we are working with scientists from around the world to understand the scale and the impact of microplastics on California's environment and our marine ecosystem, and then to develop solutions to address microplastic pollution. And finally, we are working very closely with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the California Fish and Game Commission to enhance best management practices to prevent and recover lost or abandoned fishing gear and aquaculture gear. We do not work alone, of course, at OPC. Part of our mission actually is to coordinate with our sister agencies to ensure that we are being as effective as possible and that our efforts are complementing and not duplicating one another. So California Coastal Cleanup Day, as I mentioned earlier, is sponsored by the California Coastal Commission. This is one of the most well-known efforts to address plastic pollution. It was started in 1985, and it's the largest volunteer event in the state. The State Water Resources Control Board has adopted people call them the trash amendments, which prohibits stormwater systems from discharging trash larger than 5 millimeters, so basically anything that's non-microplastic, into state waters. And to comply, local governments are now either purchasing and installing full capture systems to catch the trash in their storm drains before it goes out into the ocean, or they're paying for other equivalent measures that would be equivalent to installing these kinds of full capture systems. We've been working closely with the Water Board on their efforts in this regard. On the chemistry side of things, the California Department of Toxic Substances Control runs the Safer Consumer Products program, which identifies and evaluates chemicals of concern in consumer products. And stakeholders that work on plastic pollution have raised this concern that chemical additives in single-use food packaging, like fluorinated compounds and phthalates, are now escaping into the environment through the plastic waste. So in response to requests from the public, the Safer Consumer Products program has included food packaging in their 2018-2020 Priority Product Work Plan. And finally, OPC has been coordinating extensively with CalRecycle since 2012 on its packaging policies. And most recently, we've been coordinating both on SB 1335 and thinking through how to implement that very important legislation prohibiting food service facilities and state buildings from using packaging that's not reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And we're also coordinating with CalRecycle on their pilot reuse program, which would provide grants for projects that promote the reuse of products so that we avoid this single-use cycle that we've gotten ourselves into. So in conclusion, I would just remind everyone, marine debris pollutes our beaches. It creates a hazard for humans. It entangles and it poisons wildlife. It imposes huge costs on local municipalities through collection efforts and lost tourism revenue. And we at OPC are committed to continue to coordinate efforts to reduce marine debris. We will lead collaborative partnerships. We'll support implementation of recommendations. We will fund targeted studies to inform management, and we will share information with decision makers, including all of yourselves. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me, by the way, take just a quick moment of personal privilege. I see a couple young people from my district who are here as part of the Palos Verdes Capital Convoy, and fantastic young people. I just spoke to them last night, and everything they wanted to talk about involved the environment, plastic pollution, and ocean pollution issues. So it's the world that we're giving to them that this is all about today. So glad to see you guys here. So our second speaker is Dr. Claire Steele. Is an assistant professor of environmental science and resource management at Cal State Channel Islands, and she's an applied marine ecologist and conservation biologist. She's got extensive experience in this area with marine and coastal environments, and her research examines human impacts on coastal systems, and she assesses natural resources to how it informs coastal management. And her current research, I think, focuses on the ecological impacts of ocean litter and microplastic debris on our coastal ecosystem. So she's got a PhD from University of Rhode Island in natural resources science. Her master's is from tropical coastal management from Newcastle University, and her bachelor's of science is in biology from the University of York. So we've got a good British background as well. So I love that, and we welcome you, Deborah. We welcome you, Claire, for this presentation.
Thank you. And thank you to Chairman Allen and Chairman Stern, and to the senators for your interest in this issue. So I, along with others in this California State University system, along with researchers around the world, am studying the impact of microplastics in the marine environment. And this is an area of growing and increasingly active area of research over about the last 15 years. So what we're talking about, and when we talk about microplastics, it's generally considered to be plastic particles and fibers that are less than 5 millimeters down to about 1 micron. And so for reference, about 70 microns is the width of a human hair. So these are small particles that may be manufactured to be small, as in primary microplastics like microbeads, or the raw pellets of plastic like nurdles. There's also secondary microplastics, which are formed from the fragmentation of larger items. This seems to happen particularly on beaches where there's high UV irradiation and a lot of abrasion that causes larger items to break down. It also occurs from the fragmentation or from the microfibers that are derived from laundering of domestic clothing, and also happens from aerial deposition of things like tire dust and floating fibers from industrial carpeting and such.
Now, who came up with the term nurdle?
That's an
I love
industry
it.
term. The nurdle is the raw
It's
plastic
like out of the Muppets.
pellet. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a whole variety of materials that are manufactured every year, a huge range of plastics with different compositions that are manufactured. And along with the plastics themselves, there are a variety of chemicals that are associated with them, including additives that are used to produce particular characteristics in plastics, like plasticizers, phthalates, anti-static agents. So those are chemicals that are manufactured into the plastics. But then in the environment, certain chemicals, things like PCBs, DDTs, brominated flame retardants, tend to have this affinity where they want to stick onto the surface of plastics. And so it's not only the concern about plastics in the environment, it's also environmental chemicals that may be associated with them. And these are considered priority contaminants by governments because they're persistent, bioaccumulative, and or toxic. Microplastics are likely the most numerically abundant items of plastic in the ocean today, and the quantities of microplastics are inevitably going to increase in large part because larger plastic items are degrading and breaking up into millions of microplastic pieces. Around the globe, buoyant microplastics are concentrated in mid-oceanic gyres, those centers of circulation like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and also around centers of circulation. Recent studies have estimated the number of microplastic particles floating on the surface to be something between 15 to 51 trillion particles. But we should be aware that not all manufactured plastics float, and that also biofilms accumulate on the surface of floating plastics that causes them to sink into deeper waters and to accumulate in sediments. So the presence of microplastics in the ocean is now well established, even in very remote environments, from the oceanic gyres to the poles, from the coast to deep ocean trenches. Microplastics have been sampled from beaches, from surface waters, from deep waters, including in the Marianas Trench. They found single-use plastic items at depths greater than 10,000 meters. In the trench's most polluted regions, they found a maximum of 2,000 pieces of microplastic per liter of sediment and 13 pieces per liter in water. So it's certainly very broadly distributed throughout the ocean from the surface to the depths. And so in California, this is some of the work that we've been doing, looking at microplastic on beaches around California. We found microplastics at every single one of 51 beaches that we sampled. We know that residents of beaches, like the Pacific mole crabs, are ingesting microplastics. We found about 35% of mole crabs had ingested microplastics. And this is one mechanism, these filter feeding organisms that are very common on beaches in California, one mechanism of microplastics entering into coastal food webs. And even in remote places like the beaches of the Channel Islands, we find marine debris and also microplastics on those beaches. We find microplastics being deposited in biological communities. So we found that plastic waste can increase the disease risk of corals, elevating the disease risk about 20 times for corals that are enveloped in plastic. About 75% of turtle grass in Belize was found to have microplastics on the surface, and the center study there mentions that microplastics associate with phytoplankton aggregates. So this is one mechanism of microplastics sinking into sediments in deeper waters, is that what might be a buoyant plastic becomes encrusted and becomes negatively buoyant and will generally sink down and into the sediments. Microplastics have been found in the bodies of a huge variety of marine organisms, including invertebrates and fish and birds and mammals. Over 220 species have been found to consume microplastic, and more than half of those are commercially targeted species. The small size of microplastics is problematic because many organisms across a huge range of sizes can consume them, and they may not be able to distinguish microplastics from their natural prey items. So we see direct consumption of microplastics by filter feeding organisms, like some of the ones seen here, from all the way from plankton up to megafauna like manta rays. And we've seen microplastics that are directly consumed by detritivores, like the Marianas Trench amphipods, so found in the really deep oceans. Scientists have been finding they've consumed microplastics. Even endangered species in California, like the tidewater gobies, we've recently found microplastics in their gills, and species of seabird that ingest food from the surface of the ocean have also been shown to ingest microplastics. So then the concerns about microplastic are that we know that organisms are eating them. What are the potential consequences? So we see physical consequences, so clogging of the gut or satiation, so that animals are not motivated to feed. That leads to altered feeding behavior, potentially impaction or gut perforation, tissue damage. So these are all physical effects. And then there may be chemical effects from microplastics that include toxicity, which may be due to the plastics or chemicals that are associated with them. Inflammatory responses, immune responses, and impacts to reproduction and growth. So generally, a lot of the laboratory studies and field studies that have shown impacts of microplastic tend to be these subtle effects that are sublethal, so impacts on reproduction, impacts on growth, or impacts of individual mortality. We haven't demonstrated really very broad population and community level effects of microplastic right now. But it's certainly something we should be concerned about because microplastics are obviously increasing, and our ability to detect them and to detect their effects is going to continue to increase in the future. So these ongoing concerns, as I mentioned, that microplastics are ubiquitous in marine environments. They are increasing over time. And there seems to be evidence of effect, particularly on vulnerable life history stages, reproductive effects, that could have population-level consequences. So seafood consumption is one pathway for possible human microplastics exposure. We know that they're present in commercially important species like mussels and oysters and fishes that are sold for human consumption. But it might represent a relatively small burden to the individual consumer, so something like 50 to 100 particles per mussel. And a very committed seafood eater might consume as many as 11,000 particles per year. So these bioaccumulation and food chain effects are not yet well understood, but we should have concern about this issue because microplastic contamination of the aquatic environments will continue to increase in the foreseeable future, and there are significant knowledge gaps currently about the effects of microplastics on our marine environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sobering presentations both. And Do appreciate you being here. So let's open up the floor to questions. Folks have things they want to ask about Senator Monning.
Thank you. I want to thank you both. I think Dr. Steele's presentation, you alluded to it, but the food chain studies on fish products consumed by humans, is there data or evidence showing the plastics being transferred into humans?
There are studies that have shown that humans are consuming microplastics, and there are studies that show the ability of microplastics to transfer from a primary consumer to a secondary consumer. So it certainly does seem to be a risk, although, as I say, the actual load of microplastics is a relatively small contribution of the diet.
And this past year, the Ocean Protection Council funded a study, we don't have the results yet, to look at whether microplastics are serving as a vector for disease. So as we consume seafood, is there some sort of transfer of disease to humans?
So the public health consequence of this, I think, is a way to expand. Co-Chair Stern alluded to some people think, well, this is just a coastal problem or an oceans problem, but those vectors of human health impacted, that's anybody living anywhere potentially impacted. And is the OPC supporting ongoing public health studies on this aspect of plastic pollution?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you tell me if there are any kind of positive stories from around the world that you have come across that give you a little bit of hope, policy solutions or behavioral changes that you've seen in anywhere that we could draw some lessons from, that where beaches or marine ecosystems have been able to bounce back?
So there's a couple of questions in there. I think there are some hopeful stories. I don't know where marine ecosystems have bounced back, but I think right here in California, we have some really inspirational stories in terms of the plastic bag ban is a great example, where it started at the local level. You know, governments here and there, cities started banning plastic bags, and then it blossomed into this statewide effort. There are other regions, I think Chairman Stern mentioned, or maybe it was Chairman Allen, I'm sorry. You mentioned the work that's going on internationally in the UK to really take on this notion of the circular economy. I think there's some real strides that are being made in developing new products that are, made out of different elements than petroleum products, and that break down in different ways that are more environmentally friendly, that we should be looking at and considering in our systems as well.
Dr. Steele.
Can I just mention, so there's sort of two areas of concern with microplastics. One is microfibers, which seem to be the dominant microplastic particle. So addressing that from a wastewater perspective might be really one way to make great strides with that. And then the other little bit of hope that I would like to throw out there is the fragmentation of microplastics that seems to be particularly predominant on beaches. That is one area that people are making big differences in actually cleaning up. And so that being a major source of fragments of microplastics is one way that we can hopefully reduce them entering in the oceans. So beach cleanups, although they seem like, they are an important sort of social outreach to people, they can actually be really impactful in reducing the amount of microplastics that are being generated by beaches.
Sure. Yeah. Sure, they're vital. Chair Stern.
Can we drill down a little more on just the state of research? You talked about knowledge gaps, and where is the sort of the science and research community heading with this, and what do you guys see going forward, say, in the next year or two? That Senator Monty mentioned the public health side of things. That's, I think, a smart path to go down, certainly to understand what uptake looks like. Am I right to say, Dr. Steele, that some of the gaps are around the interaction between the ingested plastic itself and then what goes into the tissue? So in other words, the quantifying, you used 11,000 particles per person Is that an amount that's been detected in specific individuals?
That's estimated for a European, like a high-level European consumer of seafood. Yeah.
Okay, so a high seafood consumer in Europe is that 11,000 world, and but the interaction between the marine life ingestion and then that pass through, that's still not entirely understood. Like, we know that it ends up in the person, we don't know exactly how it gets there.
And especially in humans, it's very difficult to detect, the impact from microplastics from other sources, for example. So laboratory studies are looking at tissue transfer or have found tissue transfer of organic pollutants from microplastics into organisms. So we know that that occurs. But I don't know of any human studies that would be going on. It would be very difficult to separate that out from just sort of general exposure.
Right, so you'd have to you work backwards from do you eat anything out of the ocean or not?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah, so I'm feeling a little worse about sushi.
So can I just mention to make people feel a little bit better about things? So the whole organism consumes, like muscle, for example. The microplastics tend to be in the gut of the animal. So if we consume a whole mussel, we're eating everything about the animal. But for fishes, for example, they're filleted. Most of the microplastics would not be in the muscle tissue. So,
But for that European consumer you're talking about, I can't imagine they're just eating fish bellies.
this would be somebody that would be eating a lot of shellfish, for example,
Shellfish.
So shellfish is the primary. Okay.
or other fishes that are consumed whole. Yeah.
There's a reason it's not kosher.
Yeah,
shellfish.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like a little guilt trip too, because I do.
I'm the chair of the Jewish caucus as well, so I got to impose little.
But so, in addition to public health, this sort of broader impact issue within sort of marine health as an ecosystem itself, not so much in the fish consumption side of things. Can you articulate a little more about the state of play there in the research?
So I'd like to stress that this is an additive problem. So along with all the other issues in the marine environment with overharvesting and pollution and climate change, that this is an additional stressor that organisms are undergoing. So it's likely, given that we've demonstrated effects on reproduction, for example, or inflammatory responses, that there could be population level and community level effects, so ecosystems being damaged by the issue of microplastics. Certainly, as microplastics increase, we might expect to see more prevalent impacts to marine communities like that.
Could the soup end up at our shores? I guess let me put it more pointedly. That microplastic, what lives in on those islands, that we talk about, are not just big pieces, right? But it creates a sort of viscous quality in the water. Yes. Is what you're saying that as our pollution cloud expands, that we may actually see more interface with this in our communities? We're going to see more on the California coast, not less in the future?
Well, it's certainly a global problem. We know that plastics are circulating in the oceans, and so I think it will depend a lot on our actions in reducing local sources of pollution.
Do we have control over those actions? You saw the red around our coast when you showed that global map of all the hot spots. Mm-hmm. I saw a dark red off the west coast of the United States, if I read that map right. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's a consequence of there being a lot of people in Southern California or the west coast, and the microplastics that we're seeing are, in terms of synthetic fibers and such, off our shores. So it's a relatively slightly lower density in the water, slightly higher density in the sediments, but it's certainly present along the California coast.
But it's not fair to blame China.
It's difficult to say the sources of microplastic pollution. This is one of the major issues that we have because they are small particles. They don't come stamped with a made in China kind of, stamp. So it's difficult to say the sources of pollution. We know that they circulate. So we go off the coast 20 miles to the Channel Islands and we find microplastics there. So we know that they're circulating from the coast and out into the ocean water. So it's difficult to pin down the sources of microplastic pollution. A lot of what we can do is really just identifying the types of plastic and looking at the likely sources. So when we find synthetic fibers, we think they probably come from wastewater from domestic washing machines, for example. But it's hard to say exactly where microplastics, where any one individual microplastic might have come from.
And that's actually part of the microplastic strategy that that we're developing right now, is helping to figure out a standardized methodology for characterizing the different types of microplastics, so that then we can begin to take steps to address the sources.
Got it. Welcome, Senator Jackson. CSUCI is bringing their expertise to bear. Dr. Steele just
Perfect
wrapped
timing.
up. So.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Senator Wikowski.
Our backgrounder on page 3 talks about global responses. Can each of you comment on the European Union directive that was passed last winter banning or urging a ban of many single-use plastic items, setting minimum contents? Unfortunately, this legislature was unable to get to minimum content on plastic. And then a call for extended producer responsibilities, which this legislature was unable to get to a task on that. Can you comment on what the Europeans just did 4 months ago?
Well, I can certainly talk to what we know about what's in the marine environment. So about 80 to 90% of the plastics that we're seeing in the environment come from single-use plastic. So it seems like a good way of reducing the amount of ocean plastics to address the issue of single-use plastics.
Yeah, I think they when they authored it, they talk about marine debris as the goal. Ms. Haverstadt?
Yeah, so I think that this is an area where we actually do have the opportunity to learn from our colleagues around the world, and to take their leadership in hand. So the EU has been quite aggressive on plastics, and I think, I think it was in Britain was the first place where Starbucks announced it was going to eliminate straws last year. There's a lot of work on extended producer responsibility and on source reduction and on extended producer responsibility. And I think we need to be learning from those countries.
And can I follow up? You've had your three-prong,
Yeah.
your agency or the council is working on your source production. The city of Alameda, nice city, island, 40,000 people. You spend $400,000, I believe, and you got 10 restaurants to reduce their plastics and save $4,500 each per year. Did I get that right on the?
So it was $400,000 pilot project. The goal is ultimately to get 100 restaurants participating. To date, we have 46 participating. So we're about halfway. And the data that I had was only from 10 of those 46. So it's a small percentage, but yes.
Thank you.
One other thing, we're going to do our best to try to reduce waste, and we're actually going to be hearing a bill later on today about this very topic. But how much have we passed the river of no return with regards to this impact? I mean, how are we going to clean up this pollution that exists in so many places in our oceans? What's the global plan on dealing with the problem that already exists, as opposed to trying to reduce the impact of the problem in the future?
I think this is a lot like climate change. I would say that it is a global problem. We are continuing to emit plastic particles, just as we're emitting airborne carbon dioxide particles, and it's going to require local action and global action. And at some point, we're not going to be able to clean up whatever is out there and get rid of it, but we do have to stop our continued production.
Is there any effective way of mitigating the microplastics problem as it exists right now? No.
I don't believe there's a way to mitigate microplastics once they're in the environment, and they're really all we need to, the major thing that we need to do is to reduce the source of them. There's no effective way currently to take them out of the environment.
Mm-hmm. They're never going away.
Well, and if I may, the trash wheel, right? I mean, the hippos out there, they cannot grab this stuff up.
Right.
That's why it's at a micron or.
The trash wheel is picking up the big stuff.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so the idea of the trash wheel is to prevent that trash from becoming more microplastic.
Yeah. Senator Stern has an idea we could get Hasbro to basically sponsor hungry hippos to go out there in harbors all up and down the coast.
You laugh.
Yeah. No, it's a good idea.
Just wait.
Yeah.
Well, there are
Project.
products like, Legos is starting to use recycled plastic to
Yeah.
make its Legos. So this is one area where, I think, yeah.
Nice. Senator Stone.
Thank you to both chairmans, and thank you for the very educational seminar here, because I'm an inland guy, and we've heard about microplastics in the oceans, and it's nice to hear educated people talk about it and how we can mitigate it in some ways. So I've just a few questions, and you kind of alluded to it before, really not knowing, but do we know what the U.S. contribution is to the overall problem in the ocean, starting with large plastics being emitted? I mean, I think a lot of coastal communities and inland communities, for that matter, have good sorting mechanisms to get the plastics either recycled or, unfortunately, only 11%, I think, are recycled. The rest of it are put into landfills and elsewhere. And I think the eastern seaboard is probably equally as conscious as we are. But what little I have seen in the way of documentaries is showing that Asia is a very strong emitter, if you will, of gross plastics into our oceans that deteriorate and become microfibers. So I'd like to know that, number one. Number two, the toxicology of microfibers to humans. I assume that, as a human eats shellfish and they consume the microfibers, I assume from my background that the microfibers are non-digestible. I assume they're just excreted, but maybe there is some dangers to humans, and I'd like to know about any toxicology studies that have been discussed. And then you brought up that an area where we probably don't really think about very much, and that is washing machine effluent. That a lot of our garments today, some have forms of plastic, and some of these plastic microfibers are making their way into our water supply, and that way they're getting out into the ocean. So, and I think that the public is really not really aware of that. And so we have washing machines that, protect the engine of the washing machines and dryers, so with filters and vents. Is there anything that's been ever considered by washing machine manufacturers to recognize this problem? And you can put a micron filter in there to, just like we take the lint out of the dryers, to mitigate this problem that maybe just hasn't been illuminated enough for the public and certainly the manufacturers of the machines to understand.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. So first of all, as far as the United States contribution, I don't have those exact numbers now. I can certainly look for those. I would note that they've probably changed significantly since China stopped accepting most of our recyclables. And so now our waste stream diversion is very different than it was just a couple of years ago. And our impacts on the environment are going to be different. And, the impacts from China may be different as well. So I can look into that for you. Okay. In terms of I am going to defer to Dr. Steele on the dangers of plastics to humans and how that interacts with the human body. That is one of the studies that we're funding right now, but I don't know the results. And as far as washing machines and filters and things like that, that is definitely a popular idea right now, and something we've been contacted at OPC about. As we roll out our Prop 68 funding proposals and competitive grant RFPs, we will probably include things along those lines to see what kinds of technologies are out there to really facilitate that mitigation aspect.
Yeah, I'm just as concerned as you are with China no longer accepting our plastics. And so if there was ever a time to, really address the recycling efforts underway, and I know we have some bills that we're going to be entertaining this year to increase that percent. 11% is just deplorably low. we have to come up with a better system to certainly take the plastics out of our landfills and make sure that the plastics don't end up into our oceans. And so I look forward to working with the committee to ensure that we effectuate some leadership in this area. But understanding, my concern is that California is one little piece of the puzzle. We got a big globe. We have a lot of water. We have a lot of countries that don't have the environmental stewardship that we would like to have here in the United States. And we need to do what we can to, as a global community, to address this problem that you have very articulately shown is a very pervasive one. Yeah, thank you.
There'll be an opportunity to work just on that later today. Senator Jackson. Thank you. And then Senator Caballero.
Thank you very much for being here. When we talk about stewardship, California tends to lead the way. So I think it's important that we be out there first if we possibly can. And with that in mind, I'm working on this whole issue of under a bill that I've introduced, SB 424, on extended producer responsibility. We did a bill last year. I did a bill last year on EPR for drugs and sharps and the needles. And I think it's a model that we might be able to expand here that says to the producers of these products, look, folks, you can't just manufacture them and make a lot of money off them. There's the end-of-life cycle that is really creating serious problems. So I wonder, with that in mind, if you have any thoughts about an EPR approach that, if you're aware of basically what we did last year with the pharmaceutical industry. So you said, here's the goal. You've got to take back these products at the end of their lives, and you've got to dispose of them and do it without charging the consumer for it. And you figure out how to do it. And basically, we set those parameters, and nobody knows their business, I would suggest, better than they, and so they were able to accomplish that. Now, with cigarette butts, and frankly, when we do our cleanup days, there's no question but what the number one source of pollution is out there. It's cigarette butts. And those filters, the cellulose filters, are a very, very serious problem. I believe they contain carcinogenic materials. There they are on our beaches. The wildlife will ingest it. The marine life ingests it. Do you have any thoughts on how we address that problem, as well as the more obvious plastic and even microplastic elements? But certainly cigarette butts are an obvious problem, and one that perhaps we can address through the EPR process. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Clearly cigarette butts are, as you mentioned, the number one item that's picked up in coastal cleanup days and are pervasive throughout our beaches. So I think a comprehensive approach to addressing plastics is going to be the most important, one that is scientifically valid and robust, and that is implementable and scalable. So you might need to start at a local level and build up, or start at a state level and build up nationally or internationally. But at the end of the day, we need to be taking a much broader approach than just item by item, because every time we address one item, another one will pop up.
Do you think if I may through the chair, do you think that if we were to create this kind of EPR system, starting with cigarette butts or something of that nature, that it would be applicable throughout the whole process? I mean, we degrade these products degrade either naturally, or they retain, what was it, it was a whale that was just caught and had 80 pounds of plastic in its belly. I mean, oh, you showed the slide of that? Yeah, I mean, terribly unsettling to know that, and I think that I'd rather see us using the the little trash wheels than our mammal life, our marine mammal life. But I'm just wondering if there's some direction. Again, we tend to lead. I know Senator Wieckowski has been big on the EPR issue. I'm just wondering if you have some suggestions. You mentioned a comprehensive approach. What does that mean? I mean, is there some help you can give us here in this concept?
I think what would be most effective is if we could set up a meeting with you and talk in depth about kind of what your goals are. And obviously, I can't take a position on any sort of legislation. I'm here as part of the administration, so I feel a little constrained. But
Well, I'm not,
But, yeah.
we haven't actually vetted the issue. I'm looking for some suggestions
Right.
that you might have, but perhaps a conversation would be helpful.
I would be happy to do that.
From my perspective, Mr. Chair, is I think there's, the case is well established that this is a really bad problem, that the plastics. The issue is, as you suggested with your prior question, how do we solve it? I think that's where we need to be going next. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
If I could just add one thing, one of the topics I mentioned before, a little earlier, was this idea of moving to different types of products and moving away from petroleum-based plastic products. I think there's a lot of research and a lot of innovation that's going on that we could be supporting, that would move us away from the persistent plastics and towards something that is more easily compostable or degradable.
That's right. Senator Caballero.
Thank you very much. I'd like to talk to you about some of the other products that may prove fruitful and good for California at some other time. But my issue, the issue that's been raised to me recently is now that China's not taking plastic, is the need for strawberry growers to get rid of the plastic they put on the ground in order to keep the plants safe. They usually roll it up, and it was part of the shipment to China. It can no longer go, and so we're going to have a crisis on our hands. It's dirty plastic. It's got a lot of dirt in it, and there's no place to put it. And it's located on our Central Coast region. So we need to kind of put that up on the radar screen. I'm told that there is a company that does dispose of it, and it may be an incineration type of product. But I don't know anything about it. So if you have any information, I'd be interested in finding that. That came to me within the past week, and I think we're going to need to do something pretty quick because there will be tons of it. There are tons of it.
I think that you raise a really important point, which is agricultural waste and its association with marine debris. It's something that often people don't connect, but we end up seeing, twist ties from agricultural operations tens or hundreds of miles away, ending up in the ocean. So you raise a very important point. Yeah.
Okay, really do appreciate this very informative panel hearing. I will say it also points to the importance of continued investment in our public higher educational system, because we do have fantastic professors all up and down the state who do great work bringing information to us about the realities of the world. And so we do appreciate your testimony and the continued work that we will be engaging in together to try to address some of these big problems. We've got one or two solutions today that we'll be looking at later on during our hearing, but thank you for your participation and appreciate your work in this area. All right, our next panel, as we mentioned, is going to focus on plastic pollution's impact on marine wildlife and local efforts, and we'd like to ask Dr. Jeff Boehm, who's the Executive Director of the Marine Mammal Center, to come forward, and also Miriam Gordon, who's Program Director for Upstream. And why don't you get us started, Dr. Boehm. While he's preparing, I'll just let folks know that Dr. Boehm's the Executive Director of the Marine Mammal Center, which is in Sausalito, and he's been Executive Director there since 2008.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chairman Allen. Thanks to Chairman Stern as well, and to committee members. It's a real privilege to be here this morning to speak on this. I do feel the downer of this discussion, but I got to say that my firm belief is that most of us are here in this room because we're optimists, so there's that. That said, I couldn't avoid seeing the irony this morning of waking up in a hotel room and having to claw my way through plastic to get to a soap bar and to a coffee cup. So it's hard. It's ubiquitous stuff. I speak for the Marine Mammal Center. I'm a trained veterinarian. If we're keeping score on colleges at UC Davis and UC San Diego. And speak for the work that we do at the Marine Mammal Center, but also for the broader impacts on marine wildlife. So I want to trot through some slides with you to speak to that. I think it's important that you know who we are as the Marine Mammal Center. We're the world's leading marine mammal teaching hospital. There's no organization in the world that sees more patients than we do. We field more than 10,000 calls into our rescue office each and every year. So we're out there and we're the eyes and the ears and the rescuers of these marine mammals. We have a facility in Sausalito, which was renovated back in 2009. In other words, we're also first responders, veterinarians, scientists, teachers, trainers, not animal trainers, but trainers of people, communicators, problem solvers, and conservationists. The kinds of things that we see are quite diverse, everything from malnutrition to infectious diseases. In these photos, you see one of our senior scientists looking into the cause of the death of a whale, often ship strikes, often malnutrition. Center image there is an image of a brain where you're seeing atrophy of tissue from domoic acid, a toxin produced by harmful algal blooms. And very disturbingly on the right, an image of a California sea lion that is severely injured by marine debris, in this case, debris from fishing lines, fishing nets, etc. But I want to focus on plastics when we look in aggregate at the impacts of the different things that cause distress and disease for our animals. Top of the list is malnutrition. There is a category, about 10% of our animals, we can attribute the harm directly to human practices. Within that category is marine debris. We'll see everything from animals entangled in fishing lines quite commonly to ingestion of plastics, and it's always a very disturbing finding. Like Senator Allen, I saw the news out of the Philippines this weekend, which was disturbing. I also trotted through what the general public might have seen in this past year, and in the Guardian, there was a report of a whale dying after eating 80 plastic bags. And in National Geographic, there were a couple of articles just over this same past year where a sperm whale had ingested 13 pounds of plastic debris and died. There was also a report in Nat Geo of a death of a seal with a plastic bag found in its stomach. In the UK's Independent, there was a report of a seal that had been rehabilitated and physically damaged, disabled by the entanglement that it had faced to the point that it couldn't even right itself. Point being that these reports, even in front of the public, are common. This is a ubiquitous problem. The results and the impacts of it are ubiquitous as well. But that's in the public domain. Went to the scientific literature as well, and just offer you four quotations from what are three different papers out there. But the first, ingestment and entanglement in debris has been documented over 60% of all dolphin and whale species. Over a 7-year period, I should say, 13 sperm whales stranded in Italy. When they were looked at from a postmortem point of view, marine debris was found in 10 out of 13 specimens, and it was mostly plastic. So it's out there in the kind of anecdotal public domain. It's out there in the scientific literature as well, and it's a significant problem. Impacts arising from entanglement can result in injury, drowning, or strangulation, and those from ingestion vary from no discernible impact to actual blockage of the digestive tract. Others have already alluded to what we do and we don't know about the presence of those plastics as they transit a digestive tract. Sublethal effects may compromise feeding and associated malnutrition, disease, and reduced reproduction, growth, and longevity. So disturbing things just from one group of marine animals alone, those being marine mammals. So a caveat to the next 4 images that I'm going to show you, not because they're horrific, but because they're all what we call charismatic megafauna. These are the big animals that get our attention, and I would argue that they do us a service in doing that. They are attractive, they are conversation starters, they do attract the and engender and elicit the goodwill of people in an incredible way. This is the Hawaiian monk seal. It was one of the images that Deborah showed as well. This is an animal for which we built a hospital on the Big Island back in 2014. Many stresses face this species. There are only 1,300 animals alive. It's an extraordinarily endangered species. One of the threats is, in fact, marine debris. A whale shark, seemingly in this image, about to gobble down a plastic bag with marine debris floating all about above it. Whale sharks, if you're familiar with them, are filter feeders. They're moving through the water up at the surface where a lot of these plastics will aggregate. So they're basically filtering and taking in potentially a whole lot of marine debris, plastics specifically. Dr. Al Dove down at the Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta is taking care of the whale sharks in their care, but he's also doing field work extensively around the world, getting blood from wild animals, trying to correlate what he's seeing in those blood samples with what they are ingesting from other samples that they're obtaining. Sea turtles, I didn't want to put the photo of the sea turtle with the straw in its nose in here, but because I'm sure you all saw it, but you just Google sea turtles plastic and it's pretty horrifying what you see. If you think about the classic challenge of an animal that for eons has been hardwired to look at something floating in the water column of the look and shape of a plastic bag and think it's a squid and gobble it down, impacted by plastics in a severe and significant way. And this, too, is not an image that I think would be unfamiliar to you all. Celebrated isn't the right word. Notorious is a better word. The images that have come out of the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, where albatross are kind of the poster bird, if you will, for the impact of plastics on wildlife. I think it was part of what spurred Sir David Attenborough to declare the immensity of the problem with plastics a couple of years ago as he was citing what he was witnessing with albatrosses coming back to provide a stew of things like this to their chicks. So macroplastics and microplastics have been discussed here this morning already. Senator Stern had asked the very, very appropriate question of where is the science, and my colleague to my right may have more information on this. From where I sit, there's so much better an understanding of the impact on wildlife from a macro perspective. And yet, I sit in an organization where we see hundreds of animals each and every year. We are investigating the deaths of those animals for the proximate cause, but we have in front of us a study resource, a sample resource of immensity, and organizations like ours, this is my challenge to myself, need to ally with other investigators to start understanding what is transiting through the guts of animals, whatever their other cause of disease might be, and how do we get to understanding either what those plastics are carrying that's being absorbed by those animals and or other effects of their presence. It's not well understood from where I sit yet, and any one of us would say this cannot be good. So plastics impact, and this is in closing, in the context of other threats to marine wildlife. The threats are many to marine wildlife. The sample we see is specifically marine mammals on the West Coast, where we see malnutrition, infectious diseases, cancer even. And yet, the issue of plastics is one where it seems we have the most clear responsibility and perhaps have the political will because of that and because of the charisma of these animals to make a difference. So these other issues that we face in caring for marine mammals are going to occur. There is always going to be malnutrition based on the diversity of seasons and the plenty or lack of food resources. There's always going to be infectious diseases. This is a man-made issue that we introduced within the last 100+ years. We ought to be able to do something to address it. And I will close there with appreciation for the opportunity to speak before you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Bowman. Really appreciate it. It's almost less than 100 years. I mean, it's really extraordinary. Thank you for your work. We'll next turn to Ms. Gordon, who's from Upstream, which seeks to spark innovative solutions to plastic pollution for a throwaway-free world. And she's had a career-long interest in reducing toxics and pollution. She was previously California Director for Clean Water Action, where she played important roles in the launch of Rethink Disposable, which is helping food service operations move to throwaway-free operations. And so we're very appreciative of her being here and her expertise.
Thank you very much, Chairs Allen and Stern, members of the committees. I want to thank you for prioritizing these issues. And I want to turn from the bummer of the problem to a more optimistic view, focusing on the solutions. I've been focusing on solutions and how we solve this problem ever since when I was working at the California Coastal Commission. I ran into Captain Charles Moore after his first gyre journey into the Pacific Ocean, and he showed me his samples where he found 6 times more plastic than plankton on the surface of the Pacific Ocean. And ever since then, that was a life-changing experience for me. And ever since then, I've been working on this issue for the last 15 years. Moving from the state to the NGO community and seeking solutions. And before I move over to talking about unclogging California's waterways from plastic, I just want to say we've been focusing a lot today on the problem in the marine environment, but there were questions about health, and I want to offer this. This isn't just a problem in the marine environment. Plastics are entering our food chain, not just from seafood. It's in many other food sources. It's in the air we breathe. It's in our tap water. It's in our bottled water. And so moving towards figuring out how this is affecting public health. There's also hundreds of chemicals that are endocrine disruptors and carcinogens in plastics and in food packaging. To that end, Upstream is convening an international conference in June, launching 2 scientific consensus statements about the health effects of plastics themselves and micro and nanoplastics, as well as food packaging chemicals. And I would be happy to work with the committees on organizing a panel on the human health effects of food packaging chemicals and plastics. But today I want to focus more on solutions in to macroplastics. First, a little bit about my organization. We were founded in 2003 as the Product Policy Institute, and we focused on what do we do with products at the end of their useful life. And we were promoting extended producer responsibility for all kinds of product categories, and successfully, and helped found the California Product Stewardship Council, and have been involved in many EPR laws. But when we got to plastics and packaging, it has become clear to us that this downstream end-of-life management approach just doesn't really, it's not the best approach for products that we use in a matter of minutes and that have enormous environmental impact, from the extraction of resources to their carbon and climate footprint to then the toxics and plastic pollution that we end up with. So we have been focusing more on how do we upstream look at these products and develop better policies, and that entails really changing our throwaway culture.
and that's where we are now. So suggesting how we solve these problems, looking at it from a California perspective, all of our solutions should be science-based and guided by data. And so as the OPC litter strategy acknowledges, the best data set that we have is the decades worth of California coastal cleanup data. And from 1988 to 2017, the top 10 products are listed here. And you can see that cigarette butts are number one. They always have been. But 7 out of the 10 top products are food and beverage packaging related. And so we really need to be looking at those products as a whole rather than trying to pick off one product at a time and developing more comprehensive strategies. I want to point out that, so I've put in red all of the products that are food and beverage related. I want to point out that while bags were number 4 in that time period, as of 2018, bags are no longer in the top 10. And that is a demonstration that that policy that was that emerged from the ground up, that was started in San Francisco in 2007, the plastic bag ban and the charge, that works. That's as you all know, it's a statewide policy now. And that is a good case for how transitioning to reuse and prevention and bans often are a very helpful solution. So I would say that we need to, looking at this data set, we need to prioritize cigarette butts and caps as a separate issue because there's a good solution for them, and foodware as a general issue. And then microfibers are not counted, obviously, in coastal cleanup because they're too small and they're micro, thank you. But they have emerged as another very important issue area where we need solutions. So as we craft solutions, what is a framework for thinking about the best solutions for these priority products? And let me suggest this is a framework that was also reiterated in the ocean litter strategy because there's general agreement amongst the plastic pollution community and the regulators on this approach. It very much hails from our 3 R's solid waste hierarchy, the idea that we should reduce and prevent as much of the single-use throwaway stuff as possible, and then and then figure out what we do with the rest of it. So source reduction or prevention strategies include product bans, minimizing single use, and reuse or reduction. Sorry, messed that. And then then after we've done that, and that could include things like minimizing disposable packaging, like an ask first policy for straws, or replacing disposables with reusables, as our bag policy has done, and charging for products. But for those that we can't reduce, then there are the control measures, like a good waste management infrastructure that looks at recycling and composting as much as possible. And when we focus on disposal, we need to have better garbage management to prevent illegal dumping and controlling the escape of trash from dumpsters. And then there are other control measures for fibers I won't get into. But lastly, then there's the cleanup, like street litter cleaning and trash capture devices in the storm drain. But the reason that this is last, litter cleanup and trash capture, is because every time you clean up a beach or clean a street, a couple hours later or the next day, it's re-littered. So we're not really solving the problem, and we're perpetually spending taxpayer dollars to clean it up. Deborah has already discussed some of the state actions, so I'm not going to. We do have the statewide stormwater regulations, the trash amendments, that focus on that control and cleanup approach. And we've also had some great legislation in California, the bag ban and fee, which is a source reduction measure. Microbeads and personal care products were banned. Again, another prevention approach. The straws upon request is a prevention approach. It reduces consumption. And Senator Allen's foodware legislation that really eliminates foam foodware, which gets us to another elimination approach. But we still need to address these priority products, so the cigarette filters, food and beverages like the wraps, containers, cups, plates, utensils, and bottles, caps and lids, and microfibers. And I will say that we can look to local policy in California. Sometimes our local government and local communities have been leaders in the thinking on this. For example, the plastic bag ban, the first one was in 2007 in the city of San Francisco. The first polystyrene ordinance was introduced by Senator Skinner in the city of Berkeley way back in 1988. Okay, thank you. And we've had a lot of the straw and utensil bans on plastic have come from the local level. Two items that really haven't been that really haven't gotten into state legislation yet are San Luis Obispo and the city of San Francisco banned the sale of plastic water bottles in government facilities. And both San Francisco and Oakland have also attached fees to certain, to litter in Oakland and cigarettes in San Francisco, which generates more funding for the cleanup approach. But perhaps the most groundbreaking recent legislation from local government is Berkeley's ordinance, which I helped to craft in 2018, which is really getting at this source reduction approach. It says no disposables will be used for on-site dining. Imagine walking into a McDonald's and you cannot be served on disposable cups, plates, and utensils. This is what it looks like in Europe. They actually have it. So it's really not that. I mean, they actually have McCafes where there are reusable cups and you can have your cappuccino and croissant on a real plate and a real cup. Berkeley also attached a 25-cent charge on takeout disposable cups, emulating the bag charge, saying that people can bring their own. They also recognize that we want to get reusables into foodware, but BYO is not a good approach, so they are funding, have funding for the reusable infrastructure to make it possible for you to go and get a takeout meal in a reusable package that is provided by the business itself. It bans some of the worst chemicals in foodware, fluorinated substances, and it also says that all disposables must be compostable in Berkeley, but actually compostable, not just certified, but it actually does break down in Berkeley's compost facility. This is a really good model, and we are going to see, I think, more emulation of this in local government in California. Upstream convened in December a workshop for Bay Area zero waste and stormwater program operators. And the conclusion of that workshop, those local government staff said to us, we think that what we need is to have more policies that focus on reducing disposables, and we also need the infrastructure for reuse. So they are prioritizing and working with us on trying to develop a regional reusable cup and container program in the Bay Area, so that instead of us consumers having to remember to bring a whole backpack full of reusable products, that they will be available on deposit when you go to take out your coffee or take out a meal. So I think these are the kinds of innovative approaches that we need. And I also want to say that it can be extremely good for business. I am when I was the director of Clean Water Action California, I created the Rethink Disposable program that Deborah was talking about in Alameda. And that program's worked with 300 businesses so far on voluntarily reducing single use. And every single one of them, 100% of the participants, has saved money by doing things like the University of San Francisco did in their cafe, replacing disposables with reusables and just reducing single use. And I'll just say it can have enormous financial benefits. That cafeteria is saving now $157,000 a year after their operation and maintenance and setup costs are accounted for, 27,000 pounds of waste prevented, 2.6 million disposable items reduced per year, and a carbon reduction of 10 metric tons per year. So this kind of solution can make really good financial sense for businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Good work, and certainly a hint of optimism in a in a hearing that has been a little depressing. So let me open up the floor to questions, thoughts, comments from the members. We're all a little.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because it's hard to look at what we as people have done to undermine the health of our sister and brother members of the planet. But as far as, clearly there are things that we can do, and I appreciate the fact that the People's Republic of Berkeley frequently takes the lead on these things, but is often isolated because it's viewed as being some kind of lefty, who knows what, explanation for how we resolve our problems. I'm wondering, are there any statistics that demonstrate not just that it's good for the planet, but that there are business opportunities? Some of our friends on the other side of the aisle, and perhaps even in our own party, want to know what the profit or loss is going to be for a business or for a community in terms of dollars for trying these other approaches to get rid of plastics, to get rid of these kinds of materials that are creating the waste and the garbage that's permeating our world today. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I can give you some a bit of feedback from the Rethink Disposable program. So working with the independent sort of mom and pop food business, brick and mortar food service operator is saving anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 a year just through voluntarily reducing single use. And then I gave you an example of an institutional case study, the University of San Francisco, saving $127,000 a year. So I think the point I want to make is that the food service industry does not understand how much money they're spending on disposables. It's very convenient to use disposables, and everyone thinks that reuse, switching back to what some of us in certain generations remember as the way we used to get our food served in school on real plates and real cups, and the way we used to be served before McDonald's created the trash-filled meal that's called fast food, people think that going back to dishwashing and going back to reuse is going to cost a lot of money. But I set out to investigate that when I set up Rethink Disposable, and the program has proven that actually going back to reuse and being mindful about how we can minimize packaging saves businesses money.
I think that would be important information to provide us for those who are not necessarily moved by just our lack of caring and responsibility for God's other creatures, and for our own health that exists with some of these microfibers, as well as just plastics having an oil, a petroleum base to them. It would be helpful to be able to put into dollars and cents what the cost is, and how there is potentially a much greater savings by going back to the reuse potentials.
Can I just add one more thought? I saw Senator Hill holding up the compostable cup.
Question to you, Mary,
Yeah.
when you have an opportunity.
What's your
And
question?
If I may, and I know, thank you. I mean, it's you mentioned, and I was watching your presentation in the other room, the issue of recyclable or disposable, but not really disposable, or they don't kind of follow the normal track for this. And this one says compostable, and compostable.
Probably both,
It probably
yeah.
is that as well, but made from corn, and
Right.
it sure looks like plastic to me. But is this something that is compostable?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I just want to say to put that in the context of economics these are much more expensive. And the result of our foam bans, while that's good for the marine environment, getting foam out of the environment is really good for the ecosystem. It's driving up costs because the alternatives mostly have to be recyclable or compostable, and that's about 10 times the cost of what it's replacing. So we're driving up costs for food businesses. These things have to be certified as compostable. Plastics that claim to be compostable, according to California law, have to have certification. And so they may be technically compostable in a laboratory setting. But what we are hearing from the composters is, and I'm talking to them in Alameda County and Marin County, we had the Oregon composters as a whole group came out with the statement that a lot of this bioplastic stuff that's made from corn and other agricultural products, while it is plastic, it's not actually degrading in many commercial compost facilities. And so it ends up either contaminating the good organic compost, or it ends up just being screened out and sent to landfill anyway. So the problematic products have been the bio cups, bio bags, the utensils, and the bioplastic food containers. These are the things that many of them, not all of them, but many of them are telling us they're just actually not degrading in the real world setting. So they either have to be designed better, or we need to focus more on reuse.
Last question, if I may. So if we really want to, as policymakers, and I think there are a lot of people who really would like to participate, and I suspect that's the reason that we went to these different kinds of cups that apparently are not any better, or more expensive for the state, not any better for the environment. Are there places to go where we can make those consumer-based decisions based upon actual facts about products that we can reuse and recycle that are going to be achieving the goals that we want them to achieve? Do we need to do something legislatively on that? I mean, otherwise, if I could take a look at that, it has all sorts of good stuff on it. Green Stripe by Eco Products, and there's a big eco thing on here. I mean, I think many of us use these and think we're doing a good service, but we're not. So what do we do to try to put us back on the right path?
Do you want me to take? Well, I mean, I think if it's one thing it's one thing to have something that works in a laboratory setting, but as I said, we need products that work in a real world setting. So I think we need to go back. We need to involve the composters in looking at those standards but my own personal feeling, frankly, is that that growing corn and growing agricultural products can be just as harmful as extracting petroleum. I mean, it requires a huge amount of fertilizer, energy, water, and transitioning all that plastic to our agricultural systems will have enormous climate impacts and water impacts as well. So while I think it is important for us to develop compostable products that really compost in California, I think we also need to be really focusing even more seriously on transitioning away from throwaway products. And we need policies that make mandates that we reduce the amount of single-use packaging overall in California by a certain percent, kind of the way we have addressed carbon.
If I could build on that answer just briefly, the unintended consequences, tying those potentially back to marine wildlife health, and taking this consideration of leaning on agriculture as a resource for products like these. I was talking to you about marine debris impact on marine mammals. Harmful algal blooms are a very real thing that I'm sure these committees are aware of. Fueling the growth of those algae is effluent from agriculture, is warming waters. So shifting from one problem to a seeming solution from where I sit as I look at the impact on wildlife. It could just be robbing Peter to pay Paul or offsetting one to the detriment of the other.
Yes, though, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that the products are truly compostable. So it's not a matter of, I totally agree with you that we need to reduce waste and reduce our reliance on single use. But there's nothing, if we actually, I guess I'll just stick on your comment about how we need to make, you're right, we need to make sure this is not just about lab testing, but real testing of products. There are some products out there that are truly compostable, and to the extent that folks are still going to rely on single use, which I agree we ought to start to shift behaviorally, we ought to be doing more and more as much as we can to shift folks onto products that are truly compostable.
Yeah, I mean, like the fiberware is compostable. It's truly compostable. We have to make sure that it isn't lined with perfluorinated chemicals, as a lot of it has been found to be, the shiny resin coating shouldn't have PFAS in it. But, I mean, that stuff is truly compostable, things made out of paper and fibers.
Yeah, but I think, these products, I mean, there's no question that they are absolutely not as good as using a reusable, but they're also better than the other products that most people use. Though clearly, in the case of this particular cup, we need to do better. I will say I know that it's we actually had these at my wedding and they melted in the sun, so so they are corn, I suppose. Okay, Senator Skinner.
Thank you, Chair, for holding this informational hearing, because it's just really valuable for us to step back and think about the enormity of the issue. And I don't mean to say that to make us just want to bury our head in the sand, but to step back and think about the various efforts we've made over time in California. Back in 1989, passed AB 939, where we were one of the first states to set a 50% recycling goal. And while that's been talked about a little less today, we did that because we were then in a landfill crisis, and we saw that the amount of waste per person was growing, and we felt like, okay, we really need to deal with this, and we should be promoting recycling for lots of energy efficiency means, and we probably weren't thinking as much around carbon and greenhouse gases, but we were thinking a little bit about marine waste. But now we've come to the point where, well, first off, we've gotten so on one level good at recycling, there's a complete myth that if something's picked up or you put it in a recycling bin, that means it's recycled. That's a complete myth. It's not. That's collection. So to actually be recycled, it has to be remade into another product. And what's happened now is very little of that which we are collecting is being made into another product, partly due to we have much less manufacturing in United States or California that uses any of this material and remanufactures. There's still some, but much less. And we send it all to China and elsewhere, who no longer wants our material. So a lot of the focus when we read our background materials, it talks about what sword, what do they call it? National sword, sorry. So, and this focus on contaminated bundles, meaning when the processing facility prepares the bale to sell or to send to China, now China's looking more closely in whether our material is contaminated. But really, bottom line is, as other countries begin to produce the amount of waste per person that we do, they don't want our junk. They don't need it. They have their own. And so if whatever infrastructure they have for remanufacturing, they're going to use their own trash, not ours. They don't want ours. So what are we going to do with ours? And what it comes back to is the only way we're going to protect our oceans and deal with the fact that it's impossible to adequately remanufacture all of this stuff that we use now is to drop our single-use products. And then within that single use, whatever still has to remain, to have it either compostable, because that is better, I mean, it is, or far less volume. Like how can it's like now, we know that cars, for example, weigh far less. And they weigh far less because the materials we use for them, it's less material for the same purpose. So whatever single use we're going to use has to be less material, and then but we just have to use way less single use. And we're going to get to hear Bill about that later, which is great. But anyway, I appreciate the data you presented to us, and I appreciate the previous panel and the focus on our seals, our whales, our different marine life. But I think really independent of whether, and I don't mean to say this in any kind of callous way, but independent of whether we feel moved by protecting one species or another, the reality is we are basically drowning ourselves in this single-use material. And it is far more than packaging, though certainly, as pointed out, 40% of it is. So we really, it's just, as much as we realized back in '89 and a few years after that we had to focus on recycling, now we have to embrace and realize we have to focus on source reduction.
Could not agree more. Okay, really do appreciate your presentation. Very, very helpful. And stick around because we'll be having more discussion about this. Okay, thank you. Thanks to the two of you. All right, I want to call to the dais Consul General Andreas Launer, who's going to give us a brief presentation from an international example, highlighting the work that the city of Vienna has engaged in with regards to waste reduction that I thought would be helpful in the context of our discussion, and then we'll go straight into public comment.
Right. Thank
You're
you
very welcome, Mr. Consul General.
So, Mr. Chairman, dear senators, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I feel very honored. I have to apologize in advance. This has been very spontaneous, right? So I met Senator Ben Allen just last Friday, and so this was a shorthand invitation. So I have to ad lib, right? And of course, I'm not such an expert I'm just a diplomat, so I'm not an expert in environmental policies such as you are, so please apologize. And if you have any questions I shouldn't be able to answer, and there will be a few, I would be happy to get back to you as soon as possible. I'm very happy to be here. We, of course, may I say, as Austria, and I think all Europeans really highly appreciate the fundamental role that California is playing in the area of fight against climate change and environmental protection. I think it's so important that you have taken over a leading role here in the United States. And of course, and especially, I will explain a little bit later about the special connection between California and Austria in that area. We are very happy and would just like to offer our services and our cooperation, because it's just, time is of the essence here. And I think we have to work internationally together. And it's not that we always have to reinvent the wheel anew, right? So we also work with other countries, the capitals work together. So there's a lot of international experience, and exchange in that area is certainly of the essence. So Austria as such has been an environmentally very kind of conscious country for a very long time. So much of the legislation and the policies, fundamental policies, go back to the 1970s in this field. And I think that the reason is quite the same, just as Californians, right? So Austrians really feel very much attached to the nature, right? It's like in California, it's a very important part of the national identity. So we have run out of beaches since 1918. But so otherwise, we love our mountains, we love our lakes, we love our rivers, our plains, right? So it's kind of, there's a close connection of Austrians to nature, and I think that's why also concepts such as sustainability or environmental protections have been very much internalized by the population, by the politicians, but also by the private sector, by businesses. And this is what I think made Austria one of the leading countries in Europe, if not in the world, in the field of green technologies, and also on the policy side, in terms of policy implementation. So that being said, I have to say we are far from perfect, right? We have a lot of homework to do. Just on the flight here to Sacramento, I read a recent report by our Ministry of the Environment, which was quite self-critical, right? I mean, they're good news. You know, we have very ambitious goals set by the European Union, actually until next year, 2020. And there, in this report, interim report, there were kind of good news and bad news. So good news, for instance, is energy efficiency in Austria has increased dramatically, very positive, right? At the same time, the energy consumption in total has also increased, right, because of economic growth. Right, this is probably bad, right? Then it's positive that the energy mix in Austria is quite good. So we have approximately 33% currently renewable energy in the overall energy consumption, and electricity 60% by hydropower, right? So this is good. But greenhouse gases have been going up in Austria as well. And that's also because of heavy traffic. So Austria, you know, is really at the center of Europe. So we have north, south, west, east, right? So there are many factors we can't really influence also, right? So we have to be very humble, right? There's no reason to brag about anything. But that being said, I believe that Austria is, and some other European countries, are really interesting partners to work with. And if you allow, you mentioned the city of Vienna, right? I will focus on Vienna. This seems maybe a little bit odd because, of course, here I'm in the state senate. But on the one hand, I believe that all the challenges in this area we have to tackle them primarily in the cities, right? We agree on that. And then, given the densely populated areas in the west of California, right? It's if they are cities or not, right? But it's a huge, one of the hugest urban and suburban agglomerations in the world, right? And I think it's interesting for California to look at the experience of cities. So Vienna is quite an interesting example because, of course, Vienna is quite well known, because of its history. It was for 500 years the capital of the Habsburg Empire. It has a great cultural heritage, great cultural life, mesmerizing contemporary Central European city, very international. But Vienna has also received quite a lot of attention in the last decade as a model of urban development. All right, no problem.
He's from Berkeley.
My vision, nice. Better than my talk, actually, I believe, right? So it's the film score. It's Johnny Mitchell, right? No, it's good. Yeah. That was the score to my presentation, right? That's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean,
no.
It's the right thing.
All right, yeah. Yeah. So it has received a lot of international attention because it leads many rankings. For instance, in the area of livability. So The Economist has ranked Vienna first. In the Mercer study of livability, Vienna has been ranked first for 10 consecutive years now. It's leading in ranking of smart city studies and so on, and also by the United Nations, etc. And there have actually been many studies made on these studies. Why is it that a city like Vienna is so successful and leading? And the interesting thing is, it a lot boils down, not all, right? Also, Vienna has quite, a long tradition of social policies, etc. But a lot of that boils down to cutting edge and very sophisticated policies and technologies. And if you look even deeper, it's a lot about green technologies at the end of the day, right? So a lot of these technologies are not only good for the quality of living, but they're also good for our environment, right? And I think that's quite an interesting message. And it's important to mention that Vienna has become a kind of a lab for the development of the cities of the future, right? What's very specific about Vienna is that the city administration is working with universities, research institutions, also the private sector, big international corporations, to just kind of design and to work out what could the future of the cities be. How could we make our cities sustainable and livable at the same time? And this is something, this kind of very holistic approach is very, they set up whole new city districts and, work on decades just to, to find the right solutions. They really take their time in doing that. And I'll just give you a couple of examples, what the city, together with partners, so it's universities, companies, etc., is doing to achieve these kind of goals to make our cities more sustainable. So now I can't read my own handwriting, but
we'll ask you to focus in on waste in particular, so like the waste management issues. And
well, the waste management, it's interesting that waste to energy is a great issue in Vienna, right? So approximately in Austria, 50% of the waste is recycled, and so there are practically no landfills anymore. And 50% of in Vienna goes into waste incineration plants. These waste incineration plants in Vienna are so cutting edge that you have basically are very expensive, but really cutting edge. You have virtually no pollution. So I went to business school right, across the street from a waste incineration plant. I never had any, even an idea that this could be any kind of a problem. And this kind of way, this is kind of transferred into energy, and 40% of all households, more than 40% of all households in Vienna are supplied from these district heating systems with hot water and heating, and as well as air conditioning. So this is kind of a very interesting system. So.
So it's done through, is that right?
Carbon capture,
right?
Yeah. Okay, and digesters. I mean, is it sort of organic material that you're turning into energy?
Well, it's a very sophisticated system, because that's why I didn't want to focus, and I'm not an expert on that, but only focus on the waste management,
right?
Because it's a very holistic system. Like where, for instance, in the subway system, the energy produced in the braking process of the cars is fed into the energy system again, and they kind of use the electricity to operate the escalators, elevators, electricity, and so on. So it's kind of, but that's what I meant. It's basically a system which is very comprehensive, right? And which is not only limited to one aspect, which is important, of course, the waste treatment.
Okay. All right. Good. No, I mean, you've taken a couple trips to Europe on this kind of this waste management issue, right? I mean, do you want to kind of give us a quick sense of what you've seen?
I presume that Vienna is using, now we have the technology to do the carbon capture. I mean, the rap against incinerators is that, at least in the United States, we just burn the trash and all the pollutants go up into the air.
Right.
So it's, in my generation, it was the Cadillac, then it became the Lexus. I guess it's the Tesla version of incineration. It's if Priscilla Presley were here, she'd say it's not your father's incinerator, right? So these Viennese incinerators provide necessary electricity and heating for the city, but they have zero carbon emissions, or near zero.
Near zero.
Now they're expensive.
They're expensive.
They're
that's
expensive.
Right.
So,
but and they're at the city center. There are even incineration plants very close to the city center. But there has never been a public outcry. This has been done in the 1980s already. So people are wondering, like coming from delegations from Hong Kong. I had talks in Hong Kong a couple of years back, and I said, "How did you do that?" Because we can't How can you, kind of operate an incineration plant at the city of at the middle of the city, and so that is it, right? So you have to invest in very expensive technology, but it pays off.
Right, and the metrics that you have that would normally, we do a poor job of calculating the emissions from landfills here. We just sort of, it's a big California secret. Things that end up in the landfill, we know that they rot and they go through, there's methane that is emitted.
Right.
We're trying to capture that, but we don't really spend time talking about what that effect on greenhouse gas emissions is. I guess the question is that overall, outside of Vienna, in Austria as a state, have you reduced those landfills to nil?
Yes, virtually. I mean, they have been fundamentally reduced, in the last decade. So it's mostly so recycling of waste. It's a lot because it's a very comprehensive subject, right? So it's to avoid waste. This is, of course, the first step, and this is also been mentioned in your discussion. So to avoid one-time use, etc. So it's all of this public policy to educate, right, and to pass legislation that avoids one-time usage, etc. Right, and then of course it's recycling, which is really big in Austria, and there are also a lot of tech companies that focus on these areas, and then of course there's the incineration. So it's a very complex process, right?
Can you give us a flavor of the type of recycling that's happening, at least in plastics? Because, we have plastic bottles, which are relatively easy to recycle, although we do a lousy job here in California as far as we've got a 9% number. Then there's these other containers. I'll put them in dirty plastic. There's yogurt and mayonnaise and these type of things that come in these containers and wrappers. What type of job are the Austrians doing on the segregating the different types of plastic? The first question. The second is limiting the containers that the free market is using in the city. I know that the EU has directive that they're not supposed to do it, but just historically, what has Austria done?
Right. Well, first of all, as you know, in many European countries, you have a very sophisticated waste separation system, right? You don't have only these two boxes or paper, but you have one for plastic and one for paper and one for glass, for green, for green glass, for white glass, etc. Then you have kind of exactly, right? So you have a whole setup of these containers. Usually it must also be it must be indicating on the package of the material if it's recyclable or not, right? And you're completely right. It's it takes also some effort to avoid that people collect too much, right? Because they put a lot of things into the container which shouldn't be there, right?
Yeah. Or in our case, we're putting a lot of things in the containers that we're telling people to put in the containers, and yet it's not end up getting recycled.
Right.
And that's, we've decided,
it's complicated,
just for a matter of convenience, to single stream most of the residential recycling system. And, there's been some serious downsides. There's some upsides, but there's some serious downsides because it's distressing how little that which gets thrown into these bins ends up actually getting recycled in the end of the day. So we appreciate your testimony, Mr. Consul General. Thank you so much for your participation. I think this is certainly going to bring up some more questions for things that we want to learn from the EU on. I mean, this incineration issue is controversial, but it's like as Chairman Wachowski said, not your grandmother's incineration, and maybe there are ways of doing it, engaging in that kind of activity in a much more environmentally sustainable way that could actually produce energy as we move along. So thank you for being here. Thank you for participation and for your insights. So now we'll open up the moment to public comment, and we're going to give folks just the opportunity to weigh in on these issues, and then we'll go back into our EQ hearing.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Paula Treat. Am I on? Okay. I have the honor of representing the 6th largest processor, recycler, reclaimers. So I have the guys who make bottles into bottles, and worked last year with Senator Wachowski and some of you on these issues. I just have a couple of points to make. It was a fascinating hearing. I've got to go to a doctor's appointment, so I can't stay, but A couple of things. One, when you consider what is recyclable and what isn't, besides the fact it all goes into one bin, the diagram, the recycling diagram numbers aren't correct. I mean, they often have ones on them and they aren't ones. So looking at that is really key. Closed loop is what we try to do, which is you take a bottle of plastic, it's used, it goes back to our people, they make it into a new product, and then it becomes a new piece of recycled plastic, or PET. And part of our problem is the contamination of the single source of just a lot of crap going into the same bin, and then we have to sort it, and obviously 5 through 7s go to the dump because there's no other use for them that I know of right now, although I know you have some ideas. And then the fact of just continuing letting virgin plastic come into the state in containers. If it isn't recycled, it's just a problem. It isn't, you know, maybe it's cheaper, but it's just a problem. So I look forward to working with you, and thank you so much for having this hearing.
Hi there. Thank you for having this hearing. This is great, and thank you for taking public comments. I'm Krista Kamer. I'm the director of the California State University Council on Ocean Affairs, Science and Technology, COAST. I know that some of you know who we are. For those of you who don't know who we are, we're working to change that. I appreciated Dr. Gordon's comments on what some universities are doing, and I wanted to point out that earlier this year, the CSU adopted a single-use plastics policy, which will phase out the use of all single-use straws, takeout bags, and the sale and distribution of plastic water bottles by 2023. Now, I personally, as an individual, wish it was a little faster. I'm sure we all do. But I do want to point out that the CSU is the largest public university system in the country for 4-year degrees, and I hope that that serves as a model for other universities across the country as well. One of the things that I did want to say with regard to single-use plastics is that I see when I go to the grocery store that there are still plastic bags that I think are not technically single-use because the plastic is actually thicker, though they're highly disposable. So I can envision that happening with plastic water bottles, which is one of COAST's big issues. We need to ensure that if we phase out and ban single-use water bottles, that the language is appropriate so that we don't just end up with plastic water bottles that somehow are not technically single-use. The other thing I think we need to consider as we go forward is the economy and the economic impacts. This economy, I think, thrives to a large extent on single-use plastics and a disposable economy. I'm in favor of, obviously changing the way that we live, but I think that in order to be successful, we need to incorporate that aspect of it as well so we can ensure people's livelihoods and sustainable industry. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Erlin and Chair Stern, committee members. My name is Ashley Blako-Drager, and I'm the Pacific Policy and Communications Manager with Oceana. Just wanted to say a quick thank you to both committees for jointly coming together to have this informational hearing. I think it's very clear from the comments that you as legislative members have made this morning that the global plastics crisis and the implications in California is an issue that all of you are very well versed on and very passionate about. So we just want to, as Oceana, thank you for your leadership. We recognize that there's been a lot of pieces of legislation over the last several years to address some priority products, which is very important. But as some comments some of you have made and some of the expert testimony, just wanted to echo some of the comments that what we really need going forward is a more comprehensive solution to addressing the single-use plastics crisis. And we believe that recycling is important and should be promoted, but recycling alone isn't the answer. What we really need is source reduction. And obviously there are efforts this year in both houses, Senator Allen, you being one of the main authors, to really tackle this, and others on the committee, yes, to tackle the problem comprehensively. And we look forward to the continuing conversations this year. So thank you again for your leadership.
Good morning. My name is Steve Wilson. I'm the campaigns director at the Story of Stuff project. I want to thank you all for holding this hearing, and thanks for your leadership, Chairman Allen. I, over the past year, have been filming a movie called The Story of Plastic, and we are looking at plastic pollution from extraction all the way to disposal, all the way to the ocean. We've filmed on 3 continents, and some of the most startling things I've seen are in our own country. There was a question by a senator earlier about what is the United States' contribution to plastic pollution? And I can say unequivocally it's number one. And why I say that is because collectively the petrochemical industry has invested $200 billion into additional refining capacity for plastic feedstocks. There proposed 325 ethane crackers, and we are exporting this to China, and we are exporting this to Europe. So plastic pollution that originates from a river in the Philippines ultimately originated from a fracking field in the Ohio River Valley or in Appalachia or in North Dakota. We are the largest exporter of oil and gas at this point. The goal of the petrochemical industry is to put 40% more plastic into commerce by 2025. So if we think about that, that means every garbage can in our entire country needs to be 40% bigger. And I've also seen where this stuff goes. And we talk about recycling. And I was in Surabaya, Indonesia. And I was in a field where you cannot see the ground. All you can see is trees and shrubs sticking out. And you go through this waste, and you are picking out Trader Joe's. You're picking out Starbucks. You're picking out AARP cards. So it's obvious where it's coming from. There is nowhere for this stuff to go. It's why China closed its doors. Vietnam has just done it. India has done it. Malaysia is partially doing it, and so on and so forth. There is no way, and there is a massive glut of plastic coming. And until we fix the system, we are not going to solve the problem. We need to reduce by source. We need to incentivize and fix the recycling economics here in California. It is unethical to export waste at this point. I see where it goes, and I see what happens to it. It is openly burned. It is used as fuel in tofu factories and places with no environmental controls. So the importance of us taking a systemic approach and a comprehensive bill in California will set precedent for the entire country. And it's our goal and our organizational goal to use this model on a multi-state strategy, similar to what we did on microbeads. California was the first to act on microbeads. They are now largely eliminated in the Occidental world. And they are currently being, their proposals as well in Taiwan and in China. So what we do here makes a difference. I negotiated federal legislation on microbeads. And I was able to talk to legislators in DC and say, I don't care if you pass a policy because California did it. And that means that all these companies are going to have to redesign to what California did. So unless you give us our environmental language, I don't care if it passes. That's how important our state's work is in this stuff. So I recognize I'm taking a lot of time and space, but I very much appreciate your efforts here, and I'm with you to help in any way possible. And I will work to get our movie to the Capitol this summer, and the things you will see in it will change your life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. Tim Shesik with the American Chemistry Council. I will say, without question, my organization, member companies, many of our downstream customer groups recognize that we are in a critical stage in terms not only of ocean plastics, but issues around recycling and finding domestic markets for this material. No question that we need to take action and be involved in that. And I want to let you all know that we're very committed to achieving that objective. Yesterday, I distributed to your offices a packet of information that outlines a number of the initiatives that we're undertaking, not only voluntary initiatives, global initiatives, over $1.5 billion investments on ending plastics in the ocean, new recycling initiatives, legislative initiatives that we've supported in the past. We've worked with you, Senator Allen, on a bill last session. Want to work with you on this, on SB 54 that we're going to hear in a little bit later. So I would encourage you to take a look at those materials. If you have questions about them, we are certainly available to talk about not only our initiatives, but new technologies. You heard a little bit about incineration in the European setting. Many of our companies are on the innovative forefront of taking some of this material, repurposing it back to its original molecular state, using that in new technologies, or excuse me, in new products So there's a whole host of things going on. We're committed to being a part of it. Want to work with you on that, and we appreciate just the opportunity to make those comments, distribute that information yesterday, and again, encourage you to take a look at it, and happy to chat further about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Christopher Chin with the Center for Oceanic Awareness, Research, and Education. And I just spent the last 2 weeks in Nairobi at the UN Environment Assembly, where I was helping negotiate some of the resolutions on plastics for the world's highest level decision-making body on the environment. One of the things that came from this was a joint declaration, a ministerial declaration by the ministers and heads of states of almost 200 countries, recognizing and declaring that we need to significantly reduce our dependence on single-use plastics. With the proposed production increase of plastics to increase by 40% in the next 5 to 10 years, we simply cannot do this by recycling and incineration alone. And in fact, incineration is seen by most as a very toxic way to go because of the additives and all of the byproducts. This is something that we simply cannot recycle our way out of. We cannot incinerate our way out of this problem. We need to reduce the production of plastic. That is the only way that we can, as Stiv said, not have to increase the size of our garbage cans, not have to continue to export our waste. I'm very excited that California has a bill that we'll be hearing later today that can help provide the framework for this much-needed change. I'm happy to be back here, and I'm here to be a resource for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Kelly Astor. I represent a variety of waste recycling trade groups, chief among them the California Refuse Recycling Council. I devoted much of my life last year to trying to get the word out on China's national sword waste import policy and the effect that was having on the industry here. I'm delighted for the hearing that you had today and thank both co-chairs for that. I thought a lot of valuable information was distributed and conversation occurred. I don't know whether time will allow me to be attending all of the hearing this afternoon, but I also wanted to communicate to you our pleasure in offering support for your SB 54.
Thank you.
One might ordinarily think the industry would have concerns in that, our facilities are built to operate efficiently. We want a lot of throughput coming through them. But the lesson of National Sword has been for us that we really need help in terms of market development, and to the extent that your legislation steers the economy away from materials that we can process them, we can collect them. If they have no home, we're sitting on them. The idea that our consumers, our customers are made to understand that they're going to end up landfilling material that they thought was destined for recycling is a real problem for us all. So we applaud you on that, and thank you very much for this opportunity and for your attention to this issue.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Corey Scholabo, and I am the co-founder of Repurpose. We are the leading brand of compostable tableware in the retail market. We bring products, compostable products like we've discussed today, to consumers at shelf level. We created the industry at places like Safeway, Albertsons, Walmart, and are raising awareness around the issues of single-use plastics and bringing people alternatives. In the grocery aisle, there was no alternative. There were organic eggs, there was organic ketchup, but there was just the 3 Chinette, Dixie Solo plastic brands out there putting single-use plastic in the market. We created that market, and we are now nationwide the leading company. We are also a California-based company. We are in Los Angeles, and we employ 15 people. We're very much in support of this bill, obviously. We feel that our motto is reuse first, repurpose second, with the concept that we should be eliminating single-use plastics as much as possible, but I think the committee has rightfully recognized that there is a need for some single-use disposables and that they could be made from greener sources and disposed of in greener ways. So thank you very much for letting me speak, and we look forward to hearing the bill.
Thank you. And just for folks, if folks are here to comment on the bill, SB 54, please wait until that time comes. We're just taking comment on the hearing that we just had on plastic. So.
Good morning. I think it's still noontime. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Allen and Chairman Stern, for the hearing this morning and others who participated. I think it was very informative. Those of us who have been working on plastic issues for many, many years now, myself since 1992, actually, are kind of shocked and amazed that a lot of people don't already know some of the things that were shown here this morning. So I thank you for bringing that to light, and also for, I'm not going to comment, I am going to say I support your bill, but I won't comment on that at this point. One of the things that I wanted to mention here today is I'm a little bit concerned about the colleague from Vienna who spoke so wonderfully about their incineration system and where it may be state of the art and it may not be putting out a lot of pollution. It's not an answer if you're going to go to the circular economy. Anytime you incinerate, it takes those molecules out of play. It forces additional virgin production if we're going to continue to be producing single-use items. So source reduction followed by recycling as much as possible and composting are the only ways to go. And so I would strongly urge you not under any circumstances to include incineration in any kind of bill that would come out that has a goal of a closed-loop recycling system or a circular economy system. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Aaron Moran on behalf of the California Growth Association. Great hearing. Particularly want to talk about there was a section of the testimony that had to do with food and single-use reduction. Just want to make the very important distinction as you craft policies moving forward regarding to single-use plastic is just the difference that exists between grocery packaging versus more restaurant-oriented packaging. And, the things that we have to keep in mind, we like to tell people that, very often a restaurant-type packaging lives for an hour at the most. You pick up the food, you eat it, you throw your stuff away. You go to a grocery store, you're buying stuff in the deli, bakery, meat counter, that packaging is expected to keep food safe and edible for longer periods of time because people, just don't go to the store and eat your 6 muffins generally. Some do, although. But just, to bear
Depends on how bad your day's been.
Well, yeah, exactly. So just would ask that you keep that thought in mind moving forward, and just to know that, we're here as grocers. We've done several companies with both supplier and retail have taken steps to reduce the number of waste, the amount of waste that's used, because obviously, as was pointed out earlier, it helps our bottom line. But at the same time, we always have to keep in mind that safety and food longevity is of the utmost importance to our folks, and just ask you keep that in mind with any legislation moving forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, last but not least, and then we're going to go into the bills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Heidi Sanborn. I'm with the National Stewardship Action Council. We're a spinoff of the California Product Stewardship Council, and we advocate for a circular economy. I wanted to reiterate what Ms. Gordon said about source reduction is so important to have it first. Material limitation is going to be important. We have a lot of plastics that are coming at us we can do nothing with, and having them in the system is very detrimental. And then EPR, extended producer responsibility, possibly for what's left in the packaging. And I did want to build off what the woman just said about the incineration. I was in Belgium and spoke at the EPR International Conference for Packaging in 2010. At that point, they had already been in place for 20 years with an EPR system for packaging. And they had decoupled generation from the economic growth. And they had reduced incineration from 14% to 4%. So I don't want the committee to get the impression that just because we might go with an extended producer responsibility model, that does not necessarily mean increased incineration. In fact, it should imply decrease in incineration. And I'd also like to invite you all to the grand opening of the Aquafil plant, which is probably one of the first new infrastructure plants in the state recently. It's going to be in Woodland, and in a couple of months it'll be open, and it's a direct result of your vote on the carpet bill AB 1158 2 years ago to improve that EPR system. So the jobs, the infrastructure can come when we actually pass the right legislation that's fair across the board and is circular. That plant is a completely circular economy approach where it's going to produce fluff. It's actually going to go to Slovenia. Eventually, they'll build the plant in Georgia. That will then make it into pure pellets that go into Kelly Slater surfwear and into Stella McCartney handbags and can go over and over and over again. And that's where we need to strive for. So we look forward to working with you on this, and thank you very much for the hearing.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's no question that no matter how state-of-the-art their incineration techniques may be, it's an absolute subpar way of handling this problem. The sad thing is that a lot of stuff that folks think is being recycled when they throw in their bins here in the United States ends up actually being incinerated under much less environmentally friendly standards than in Vienna, in Indonesia, and elsewhere. So this is why we're trying to address this problem holistically with regards to source reduction and all of the issues that are wrapped up in SB 54. So with that, let me adjourn this joint hearing of the Natural Resources and Environmental Quality Committees. And now we will start with the Environmental Quality Committee. And with your forbearance, I've checked with the members, because we have some witnesses that need to go back to the Bay Area, we're going to present SB 54 first and then go on with the rest of the agenda from there. So, and I invite my my joint authors to the dais and pass the gavel to our Chair Emeritus, Senator Wachowski.
Everyone should be a joint author.
Okay, members, this is, as the members of the Natural Resources Committee leave the dais, this is the Environmental Quality Committee. This is item number 3, SB 54, by Chair Allen, as well as I assume Chair Stern is going to stay here. Gentlemen, when you are assembled,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Feel free to begin.
All right, so thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members. And I want to thank my joint authors on this measure, Senator Skinner, Senator Stern, Senator Wiener, and our friends on the Assembly side, the joint authors over there. There's a companion bill on the Assembly side authored by Assemblymember Gonzalez and Assemblymember Ting, and we have a great team over on that side as well. So this bill seeks to address some of the issues that we've been talking about today by reducing the amount of waste that burdens taxpayers and our local governments, plagues human health, and pollutes our natural environment, by decreasing single-use packaging and products sold in California, and ensuring the remaining items are effectively composted and recycled, and truly composted and recycled, speaking to the issue that we heard earlier. In California, the sad truth is that less than 15% of single-use plastic is recycled, with the cost of recycling exceeding the scrap value of the plastic material. And so that's causing a problem in the recycled market that we've discussed as well. Unlike natural materials that decompose, nearly every piece of plastic ever produced still exists in our landfills or in the environment, and it's not going to go away. As these items fragment into smaller particles known as microplastics, they concentrate toxic chemicals and contaminate our food and drinking water sources. And then these toxins ends up in bottled water and table salt and fish and agricultural soils. And there's no question that there have been toxins associated with these plastics that do end up being linked to cancer and birth defects, impaired immunity, endocrine disruption, other serious health problems. And the cost is being borne right now just on litter cleanup alone by our taxpayers. People talk about how do we make this cost effective. The fact of the matter is that local governments, taxpayers, are still spending $420 million every single year. Our local governments right here in the state of California in annual ongoing efforts to clean up and prevent litter in our streets, in our storm drains, in our parks, and in our waterways. So cleanup is costing our people a lot of money right now. And unfortunately, as we heard, not only is the cleanup expensive, but it simply can't keep pace with the production of single-use disposable items, or the fact that those items are breaking down into microplastics, which simply cannot be cleaned up because they're too small. This crisis is only getting worse. We've heard about how China, India, and all sorts of other countries are now no longer taking our trash. That's now getting incinerated oftentimes in Southeast Asia in environmentally deplorable conditions. Or just not landfilled there, but just tossed out into their environment that end up in the ocean and impacting animals such as the whales that we saw on the slide earlier today. So this bill seeks to create a comprehensive framework to address the pollution and waste crisis, handing over to CalRecycle the responsibility to adopt regulations to source, reduce, and ensure that we are recycling at least 75% of single-use packaging and products by 2030. It calls for a scoping plan, and it outlines how CalRecycle will achieve those goals. It asks our CalRecycle to adopt regulations to determine criteria for recyclability and compostability to address the issues that were raised earlier in the hearing. And this is based on the SB 1335 compromise that several of you were involved with. And it also calls on plastic manufacturers to demonstrate a 20% recycling rate by 2022 and then a 40% rate by 2026 to address the market associated with recycling. And so We think that this is a comprehensive approach that will address the dire issues that were raised by the hearing today. And I'd like to ask my esteemed joint authors to say a few words in support of this important measure. Senator Stern.
Senator Stern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'll be brief. There's a sort of personal and moral case to, I think, be made about the need to act boldly this year in terms of what world we want to leave our kids and how we actually want to steward our land and who we are as a people. And then there's the mechanics. And very briefly, I'm excited about this measure because I think the design is elegant. I don't think it's overly hands-on and prescriptive about micromanaging a process or trying to predetermine what outcomes are that industry is going to innovate around. Frankly, innovation around ethane cracking in fracking fields in Ohio River Valley is not as exciting to me as new businesses popping up all over the state of California to actually solve this problem. So I think this sort of framework that you defer to this regulatory agency to at least work with the stakeholders out there to come up with some framework and not try to dictate too much from the legislature about what that might look like is a really smart design for the future. And I think we're going to see jobs be created out of this progress, not limited. So thanks. Up to the north.
Senator Skinner.
Thank you. This is a very essential bill at this point in our state's progress on dealing with waste and in the world's. As I referenced earlier during the hearing, I do have a bit of a long history on these issues, and I was part of a group of people that wrote the very first 50% waste reduction ordinance in the U.S., which was passed by the voters of Berkeley in 1984. And we did that because strongly on the belief that recycling and waste reduction, but mostly recycling, could help us get out of our trash and garbage issues. But as time has gone on, we have realized that we have increasingly dependent on more and more products that are either single-use only or not recyclable. Additionally, we have confronted that our recycling markets have collapsed. We've additionally confronted that our production of these single-use products is hugely energy intensive, so thus contributing to our climate crisis and pollution of all sorts, and that our whole recycling system, while initially conceived as something that was, we could call energy neutral, did not end up being so. In other words, the benefit of collecting a material and remanufacturing is that you are using less energy than making that product from a raw material. That's still the case for a few items, but not much. Now there is so much resources, meaning fossil fuel and other, involved in our whole recycling system, other than keeping waste out of perhaps our marine environment. It is not giving us the environmental benefit that our first intention was. So we cannot recycle ourselves out of this problem. And especially we cannot recycle ourselves out of this problem as our use of materials that are not recyclable and are single-use only keeps growing. Yeah. Now, I mentioned that I was part of that group that wrote that first ordinance, which was passed in '84. By 1989, in realizing this, even as early as then, we then wrote a second voter initiative, which the Alameda County voters passed. And that initiative led to the creation of StopWaste.org. But let me tell you the name of that initiative, which very rarely gets referenced anymore. That initiative was called the Source Reduction and Recycling Initiative. And what it created was a Source Reduction and Recycling Board. So Stop Waste renamed itself, and that's a great name, but its ordinance name or initiative name was Source Reduction and Recycling. And the source reduction part has been the thing that not only Alameda County, but all other, the United States has not done to the degree that Europe, Japan, and others have.
And that's the challenge we have now. And I'm so proud to be a joint author of this bill. And I had been contemplating introducing a bill based on what the city of Berkeley just did in relationship to fast food, packaging, and such. But I thought, just as my colleague Senator Stern referenced, rather than continuing to go after just this product or that product, whether it's a styrofoam cup or a plastic bag, we need to look at it comprehensively. We need that very holistic view because the unintended consequence, for example, of my styrofoam ban, as the author of that, was that clamshells, the styrofoam clamshells were eliminated, but clear plastic ones came in place, and they were not recycled, and they were not composted, and they were just, in a way, as bad. They didn't have the hurt to the atmospheric ozone layer, but anyway, so this bill is elegant in that it doesn't just target a single product, but rather looks comprehensively at how we can do the source reduction that now is our challenge. And with that, I thank you and urge your support.
Well, thank you very much. Let's elegantly open up the public hearing to hear from people. If there's anybody in the public that's in support of this legislation, would like to address the committee, please come forward. This is SB 54.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mike Sangiacomo, and for the past 3 decades, I have been the president and CEO of Recology. It's a 100% employee-owned resource recovery company. We manage recycling, composting, solid waste collection, processing, disposal services for over 100 urban, suburban, and rural communities in California. And we happen to be the largest composters in the state of California. Recology's mission represents a fundamental shift from traditional waste management to resource recovery. Our vision at Recology is to create a world without waste by developing and discovering sustainable resource recovery practices that can be implemented globally. This begins by recognizing that only through partnerships can we build a closed-loop ecosystem that both protects the environment and sustains local communities. This is what makes it possible for the communities Recology serves to achieve high landfill diversion and meet sustainability goals. In other words, we're in this together. For decades, Recology has captured plastic materials through our recycling programs in California, Oregon, Washington State, and marketed much of that material for reuse, principally throughout Asia. In other words, we had a place to send plastics. For many rigid plastic containers, we're still successful in finding markets for these materials to be remanufactured into new products. However, many global reforms, most notably China's National Sword program, which banned mixed plastic imports, have closed nearly all end markets for plastic packaging products. Even before this door was closed, we struggled with what to do with many of the polymers that are being introduced into the waste stream without regard for secondary use markets. We followed the work of innovative companies that have attempted to reverse engineer the plastics manufacturing process and reclaim the petroleum products from which these materials were created. Unfortunately, none of these efforts have proven scalable, not with the enormous influx of single-use plastics into the marketplace. We even tried to unlock the secret ourselves. For 5 years, Recology employed a PhD chemical engineer with 25 years of plastics manufacturing experience. Given the mission to find something to do that we can do with single-use plastic waste, his work netted no practical results. The simple fact is there's just too much plastic and too many different types of plastics being produced, and there exist few, if any, viable end markets for the material, which makes reuse impossible. The tipping point for me personally was when 60 Minutes aired a powerful segment on plastic waste a couple of months ago and its impact on the environment, along with the efforts to clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. A portion of that feature was filmed at Recology's Recycle Central facility at Pier 96 in San Francisco. That's our largest, most technologically advanced recycling facility. I came away from watching that story with the overwhelming feeling that we're nearly out of time as the planet's oceans and wildlife are increasingly overrun by plastic waste, and our company, my company, was not doing enough to be part of a solution. So I wrote a personal letter to Cal Dooley, CEO of the American Chemistry Council, and challenged the plastic industry to come up with scalable and effective reforms that ensure that single-use plastic products are truly recycled and are truly recycled. I also told the plastic industry that they don't work with companies like us to help find solutions, that we would sponsor a ballot initiative seeking to ban single-use plastics in the state of California. One of my colleagues likes to describe that that's what we Italian people like to do. But in all seriousness, I'm here today to support SB 54, which has the promise to help drive the industry towards this needed change by requiring plastic and other single-use materials sold in California that be recyclable or compostable by 2030. SB 54 also sets an important milestone requiring the state to recycle or otherwise divert from landfills 75% of single-use plastic packaging and products sold or distributed in California. By requiring a manufacturer of single-use plastic packaging or products and sold or distributed in California to demonstrate a recycling rate of at least 20% by January 1st, 2022, and a recycling rate of at least 40% by January 1st, 2026. SB 54 sets clear goals to reduce and recycle single-use materials that will help communities throughout California as well as our marine habitats. Recology's 3,700 employee owners are deeply concerned by the effects and proliferation of single-use plastic waste and are committed to helping California become a leader on this matter. I just want to add that during my 30 years as CEO of Recology, we've worked with numerous industries to try and work with them to figure out how to make their products more recyclable. And I'll tell you, so far, the plastics industry has not been one of them.
We'll hear from your next witness. Don't go far away because your members of the committee may have questions on what's going to happen between now and 2020. The second witness, I believe there's a second witness. Come on up.
Good afternoon, Chairman. It's a pleasure to be on this side with you, and Senators. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Linda Escalante with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm here on behalf of nearly 400,000 members and supporters that we have in California. Our members in the state and across the nation are paying close attention to the issue of plastic pollution in our environment. Coastal and inland communities are dismayed by the impacts of this pollution on wildlife in the neighborhoods, parks, waterways, and of course in our oceans ecosystems. People are also alarmed about the health concerns with microplastics. Last year, you all might have heard from over 6,000 of our members urging you to support the Straws by Request bill, AB 1884. Our short social media video on this particular bill was one of the most watched last summer across the country. Our members are all in this fight to ban single-use. We're in this fight on the fight to ban the single use of plastic bags, and we are all in this fight against plastic pollution. We have also spent years working with municipalities developing zero waste programs to move them away from landfills and incinerators. If you create a clean single stream of recyclables, you can create a circular economy. However, it is critical to reduce the feedstock to begin with. Our plastic waste must go somewhere, but we can no longer continue exporting our problem to nations half a world away. Their doors are closing because they're getting buried under it. This is a moment of reckoning. We can't keep adding more and more plastics into our natural systems. We can't keep trying to trap it, bury it, or burn it. If we continue to do that, we will continue to tax Californians. Our own study found a few years ago that our cities spend well over $400 million a year of taxpayer dollars to deal with marine debris, which is only a fraction of what actually ends up in the ocean. Historically marginalized communities have also been paying with their health and even their lives, as they have been bearing the brunt of our out-of-sight, out-of-mind mentality. Landfills and incinerators are an environmental and social justice problem. So it is the fact that more plastic packaging means more trucks delivering our goods and more climate and air pollution. Some staggering statistics: 34% of plastic produced is used in packaging, and the majority is only used once. Less than 14% of plastic packaging is recycled globally. SB 54 is exactly the kind of policy that gets at addressing the root of the problem by creating incentives for industry to use less plastic packaging in their products, by making this packaging fully recyclable, ensuring that recycling happens, and creating a circular economy where we can repurpose those materials locally and create those jobs locally. Plastic as a material can have a useful application, like in healthcare. It is a necessity, but the problem is that we are using it for everything. California has a responsibility to lead on phasing out plastics that are not reusable, recyclable, or compostable. The public is paying close attention to the solutions to plastic pollution that you're coming with now. From the extraction of fossil fuels to transportation to disposal, they are polluting our air, water, wildlife, food and parks, beaches, and even our own bodies. This would not only reduce plastic trash and the cost of managing it, but it would create jobs locally, protect our pressure environment in our lives that depend on it. Thank you.
All right, now we will open up the public hearing. And may I ask members of the public, if you heard something during the joint hearing, or you've heard one of the witnesses here and you agree with them, please just let us know that you agree with them and not repeat the exact same statement that they had. We are at the 3.5-hour mark, so I'd like to get through this portion of the public hearing efficiently.
Mr. Chairman, members, Mark Murray with the Environmental Group Californians Against Waste. I'd like to echo the comments of Senator Skinner in that this is an elegant bill. We have done this before. We know how to do this kind of policy. We've done it on a piecemeal basis. This is the opportunity to do it in a comprehensive way, available for any technical questions as well.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Mark Aprea with Aprea McKaylee on behalf of Republic Services, and to paraphrase Vice President Joe Biden, this is a big deal, and we're wholeheartedly in support of SB 54. Yeah, I left one word out. And I just want to make one data point for this committee. Every day, single-use packaging and products generate tons of waste in California. As an example, flexible plastics are less than 4% of our waste stream by weight, yet they are easily 70% of our problem at solid waste processing facilities, contaminating otherwise recyclable materials at our material recovery facilities, clogging our equipment, and contributing to litter. We urge your aye vote.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Corey Sholabo. Apologies, I didn't know to not come up the first time. I am the co-founder of Repurpose. We are the leading company distributing compostable tableware to the retail market. One of the things I wanted to represent is business. We are a California-based business. Our company is, as I said, the largest seller of these products to retail consumers. This has been a business boon for retailers like Rayleigh's, Save Mart, Lucky, Safeway, businesses in California who are making money from offering an alternative to the plastic that's on the shelf. It is also obviously a for-profit company, ours, that employs 15 employees in Los Angeles, along with numerous people nationwide. So I hope to represent the innovation and the companies that are going to come out of bills like this and continue to grow from bills like this. We are fully in support of it and are a resource for anyone who would like any questions.
Thank you. Next.
Mr. Chair, members, Kelly Astor on behalf of the Inland Empire Disposal Association, the Solid Waste Association of Orange County, and the LA County Waste Management Association urge support.
Thank you.
Heidi Sanborn again with the National Stewardship Action Council, and we strongly support this bill. We're finally getting at source reduction and producer responsibility in packaging. We thank you for the bill.
Thank you, Jason Schmelzer, on behalf of the California Product Stewardship Council and the aforementioned Alameda Stop Waste, in strong support of the bill. Thank you.
Melissa Romero on behalf of the California League of Conservation Voters in strong support of the bill. And I want to thank Senator Allen, Senator Skinner, and Senator Stern for their passionate leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Juan Altamirano with Audubon, California, and on behalf of Azul, also in strong support.
Madison Dwelly on behalf of the California State Parks Foundation in support.
Christopher Chin with CORE, the Center for Oceanic Awareness, Research, and Education. And as I mentioned in my testimony earlier, the reduction of single-use plastics is what the world wants. It's what the world needs. Thank you for this leadership and for building this framework here in emphatic support.
Good afternoon, Ashley Blake-O'Draker with Oceana, in strong support with equal emphasis on source reduction. And again, I just want to say a quick thank you to Senators Allen, Stern, Skinner, and Wachowski. Hopefully I got all the personal thank yous out that I missed in the joint hearing. So again, thank you very much for your leadership and look forward to the continued conversation through the rest of the session.
Good afternoon again. This time I'll actually introduce myself. I'm Catherine O'Day, Executive Director of Save Our Shores, based in Santa Cruz. I've also been a consultant in circular economy for the past 5 years, in addition to my work with Save Our Shores. I obviously emphatically support SB 54, and I would just add one thought. If the other side of the table, if industry begins to tell you that it's an economic burden, they are going to be far more burdened when there are no resources, especially when we don't have our most important resource on the planet, which is our ocean, without which there is no life on Earth. So we need to stop taking resources for economic purposes without considering the environment, or there simply won't be an economy anyways. So please go forth with your bill. Thank you.
Annalise Rivera with Defenders of Wildlife, and we are in strong support. Thank you.
Lauren Cullum with Sierra Club California, and we're in strong support.
Emily Fieberling with Environment California and CalPERG, and I just want to stress the urgency and importance of this bill. We're already going to spend the next, all of my life cleaning up the waste from the past 50 years, so we need to pass this one.
Laura Ferrante on behalf of the California Refuse Recycling Council in support.
Steve Wilson, Campaigns Director for the Story of Stuff Project. I've sailed to 4 of the 5 oceanic garbage patches, and out there I had a transformation, and I realized the scale of the effort is to address the problem is much smaller than the problem itself. And today we're actually changing that. Well, this is how we scale the effort to the problem itself. So thank you for stepping up. Story of Stuff is in very strong support.
Good afternoon. Brian Medina on behalf of Rethink Waste. We're in support of this bill.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Schroeds, Associate Director of Policy and Outreach at Heal the Bay. I want to send out a big thanks for putting this up on the docket. And just an echo of urgency. This is a now problem, and it's a problem we've been dealing with for far too long, and our constituents really care that this moves through. So thank you for your leadership, and I hope that that continues. Thanks.
Brian Nowicki, Center for Biological Diversity. On behalf of our 100,000 members and supporters in California, in very strong support of this bill for the impacts on health, the wildlife, the oceans, and the climate. Thank you.
Hello, Melissa Aguayo, Advocacy and Education Director at the Five Gyres Institute. When we look at the merged data sets from the United States, and we look at the top 9 out of 10 products, most polluting products, it all comes back to packaging. So we are in very strong support of SB 54. Really, really grateful for your leadership. Thank you.
Janet Cox for 350 Silicon Valley. We are in strong support and really grateful to the co-authors for taking on this big, important job.
Tina Gallier for 350 Sacramento in strong support, and thank you to Senators Allen, Stern, and Skinner.
Good morning. Justin Malone for Surfrider Foundation, Clean Water Action, and for the reasons that were explained by Recology, the California Compost Coalition.
Genevieve Abaddon on behalf of California Coastkeeper Alliance, Environmental Working Group, Wish Toyo Chumash Foundation, and Seventh Generation Advisors in strong support, and I'm so excited to be working on this bill with you three and Senator Wiener.
Ernest Pacheco, Communication Workers of America, District 9, in strong support.
Good afternoon, Teresa Berkovich on behalf of Zero Waste USA Upstream and Plastic Pollution, Plastic Pollution Coalition in support.
Jim Lindberg on behalf of the Friends Committee on Legislation of California. We're in strong support. Thank you.
Hello, John Kennedy with the Rural County Representatives of California. We've got a supportive amended recommendation on the bill. We appreciate and support your efforts to deal with national, SWORD, and other countries that have import bans, efforts to increase in-state recycling and increase compostability and recyclability. We have some concerns with how this could possibly be implemented as the bill moves on in the future with regulatory agencies. We look forward to working with you guys on that. Mainly, we're dealing with SB SB 1383 implementation on organic waste recycling. Don't want to repeat some of the same problems we're having there, so look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Let's hear from opposition. If there's a couple of witnesses that would like to come up in opposition, please come forward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Tim Shestak with the American Chemistry Council. You know, we are listed as opposed to this bill. We're not opposed to what it's trying to achieve. I just want to be clear on that. We appreciate the approach that this bill is taking in terms of setting a recycling goal and requirement and having the industry achieve that. We've set our own recycling goals, announced last year that 100% of plastic packaging be recyclable, recoverable by 2030. So we're not opposed to this, what the bill is trying to achieve. I do want to point out, though, that we have some questions and concerns about how the bill is currently drafted and how it would be implemented. The scope of the bill is unclear. There's terms that are used that we don't think are interchangeable, but they're used throughout the bill. Single-use packaging, single-use products, single-use consumer goods. It's an issue that I think we need to address as this bill moves forward, because it is unclear of the universe that we're looking at. The bill does grant unfettered authority to CalRecycle to develop implementing regulations, and it specifically talks about any other regulations and policies that the department deems necessary. That's pretty open-ended. It's a huge delegation of the legislature's, in our view, oversight of this issue to CalRecycle. And so we think there should be some clear guidelines and oversight by this body as this bill moves forward. In terms of the timelines, we think practical timelines are needed. I personally don't think you can achieve a scoping plan out of CalRecycle in a one-year period. It's going to take time to develop increased infrastructure, markets for some of this material. So I think as we have these conversations, I think we can certainly work on that. But I think as currently drafted, it's difficult to determine whether or not it's practical to achieve. So that was another issue that I would want to highlight. A lot of talk about source reduction. Packaging serves a lot of purposes. It helps ensure that products are delivered to the consumer in a fashion that it's safe, that's efficient, the product gets there, that it's not broken. So simply eliminating packaging, I think, may not necessarily be technologically possible. So that's another issue that I think we have to consider as this discussion continues. There is on the books a law that CalRecycle has been implementing since the early 90s that governs plastic containers of 8 ounces to 5 gallons, requiring them to contain a certain percentage of recycled material or be source reduced. A number of companies have been complying with that law, have been increasing the amount of material, recycled material that they're using in the production of their products. We're not clear how this bill would intersect with that program. So that's another issue that I think deserves some attention and conversation, how to try to figure that out. Finally, the final thing I'll mention is that we are committed to getting to these thresholds that have been established in the bill. We think the bill could be improved, and if it's based on SB 1335 from last session, which we supported, appreciate Senator Allen's work on that with us, there should be, and it contains in that bill a stakeholder provision that involves industry, environmental groups, others, packaging engineers. It's going to require those people to be involved in this conversation. It's not clear that is outlined in the bill, and we think that it certainly needs to be improved. So with that, we are listed as opposed. That doesn't mean we're not interested in working on finding a solution. We're very much interested in that. We're committed to doing that, and we look forward to working with all the authors on this proposal as it moves forward. So I appreciate taking the time today. Thank you.
Next witness, again.
Mr. Chairman, members, Joe Ackler for Plastics Industry Association. Mr. Shestak outlined the same concerns we have as a coalition. We worked with Senator Allen last year at SB 1335 and came support. I think we're in a unique position to offer you input and solutions. But the most important thing is I've been told to tell you we want to be part of the solution. We're dedicated to it, and we're looking forward to working with all three authors. And that input from industry is very valuable. We have to do it. Thank you.
So let's open up the public hearing. Those opposed, please come forward.
Tom Jacob with the Chemical Industry Council of California. I'd just like to echo the same concerns over the bill and its potential scope and how that's to be whittled down and really focused.
Nicole Quinones on behalf of the Household and Commercial Products Association. We also have an opposed unless amended position and look forward to working with all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Katie Hansen with the California Restaurant Association. We have an opposed position on the bill for the reasons stated.
Good afternoon, Mandy Lee on behalf of the Personal Care Products Council, echoing a lot of the concerns of the previous speakers. Our members are actually pretty active in this space. We're a participant in a coalition called SPICE, which is the Sustainable Packaging Initiative in Cosmetics. So we're doing a lot in this space and look forward to working with the authors on a solution.
Good afternoon. Larissa Cespedes on behalf of the Toy Association. We endorse the comments made by ACC and Mr. Shestak and appreciate the opportunity to continue to work with you on this.
Aaron Moreno on behalf of the California Growth Association. Associate our comments with Mr. Shestak. Make clear that even though the analysis says that CJ opposes the bill, our position is opposed unless amended for the same reasons stated by Shestak. We look forward to working with the chair and other authors on crafting a solution that is workable for everybody involved. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Adam Regley on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce. We support the opposed unless amended position of Tim Shestak and the ACC for the reasons stated, but we do recognize the international problem with the national sword policy and our ability to recycle here in the state of California. So we hope to work with the author and find a way forward. Thank you.
John Hewitt on behalf of the Grocery Manufacturers Association. We are also opposed at this time for the aforementioned reasons. Thank you.
Okay, let's close that public hearing and bring it back to the dais. Let's move forward to January 1, 2020. The bill, as in its first form now, requires a recycling rate of not less than 20%. How do you folks anticipate that being calculated? And I guess some of the if I'm making plastic something and I've got 20% recycled content, does that meet the threshold, or is it an aggregate in all plastics? Because this is a source reduction goal.
You know, so the issues raised by Mr. Shestak and you know, and that are at the heart of your question, kind of speak to the model of this bill. I mean, we really are kind of creating broad guidelines that address the concerns that have been raised this morning with regards to this problem that we have as a society, and then asking CalRecycle, who are the experts in this area, to come up with the regulations to meet the goals that are laid out in the bill. So I guess it's purposefully not as specific as you're asking for, because we want there to be a process that does involve stakeholders. And by the way, you know, speaking to Mr. Shestak's concerns, there is a stakeholder process, and we certainly want to talk to him about strengthening it if that's a concern. But we are ultimately asking CalRecycle and the experts there to figure out and promulgate rules that will address the broad outline goals of this bill. And so I know you're asking for specificity, and we purposely aren't providing specificity because we're getting them to do it.
Some would say elegantly not providing specificity.
If I could add,
seems to be a term.
If you think about it, if the bill was crafted to be more directive, then we could be in the situation where we, for example, said, well, stop the use of this, stop the use of, say, styrofoam, stop the use of the plastic bag, without, when we don't know yet what the unintended consequence of that is. So the benefit of allowing our regulatory agency to engage in this and start to develop regs is to allow for more thought about what the potential unintended consequences of action X or Y is. So when you think about even AB 32, had AB 32 been written, rather, it was written to express a goal and to give the Air Resources Board the ability to figure out how best to meet that goal. If it had been written, instead, go after this source of greenhouse gas emissions, it may have completely not factored the fact that what we now know, that our black carbon is such a significant greenhouse gas polluter, which now the agency, of course, is regulating. So I think when I was saying the word elegant, it really was what I meant, is that it's rather than us trying to predetermine what the specific right approach is when we haven't factored the unintended consequences of that specific right approach, or whether the markets exist, or whether there's facilities that can remanufacture that material, thus really recycling, closing the loop, would be a mistake. And so it's giving the ability for the agency to do that, who has the ability to look at the state of the markets, to look at the state of production facilities in California or the U.S., the state of the materials, and all of the rest of it.
But aren't you also just talking about leakage? Because if you ban something, you're going to have to create something else. I mean, it's sort of like Senator Hill in the cup, right? You know.
But we're also, I mean, I think the baseline provision is an important one to understand, is how to actually understand the scope of the problem. And the amendments that were added in the most recent round about determination of what is truly single use, because as we heard from some of the testimony, we don't even know what can be used once or twice, right? I mean, that's evolving, and the ones and the twos lie to you sometimes, and the labeling is tricky. So it's to actually scope that and get a baseline of what the scope of single-use plastics are in the state, and that definition process, I think, as the Senator said, is purposely sort of deferential in some ways to the process. And we're hoping once you get a sense of that baseline, then you can actually hit a 20% target in a reasonable fashion, as you're mentioning. But it's hard to approach that until you know the scope of it's like the inventory, and then this is how we did with climate, right? You start with the greenhouse gas inventory, you understand the full scope, and then you can actually have
I'm internally optimistic. I know Governor Brown spent 3 years meeting with stakeholders on the recycling issue, so why not? Let's get it done in a year.
But essentially, by the way, this is the 20% rate is by 2022, and then it kind of goes up from there. So not 1 year, but essentially, this is about addressing the issue that came up before, that the senator here alluded to, that a lot of things say recyclable, and I think Jerry Hill was looking at the product. But the question is it actually being collected, and is it being turned into another product? That's what recycling rate means, making sure that we actually give real, tangible meaning to the labeling on these products. It's about not whether it is recyclable, but is it actually getting recycled and turned into a usable product.
Senator Bates, good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you, Senator Wachowski, for covering for me while I was at a bunch of other meetings. But anyway, I'd just like to make a statement first that I think what we have here in the issue is indisputable, the problem that we're facing with the plastic pollution, indisputable. But I think what you presented here has a disputable component to it. And I think the first and most important issue that I think is troubling and will be troubling to our constituency is the definition of single use, because we have toys. And those of you who are new fathers and all of that, you know how much you kind of bring in. You can't believe that you got this whole new room full of stuff, and a lot of it's plastic, and it is probably not it's a product rather than a packaging. So I think that the focus that will be more comfortable in terms of we going forward is to be focusing on, is it a product? And this is directive to Cal Recycle, basically. Is it a product, or is it a packaging of that? I think Cal Recycle needs to provide some testimony here in terms of how they will deal with this new assignment. They have many, as you know, when we have the wildfire issue and how we're recycling all that. So I'm just cautioning when this gets to appropriations on either side of this House, And we hear Department of Finance say just for the beginning, we need 200 new employees and $500 million more dollars. Is it worth it? Well, I think when you're looking at the problem, I think that the cost is something that we shouldn't, be diminished in terms of going forward to try to solve the problem. But I think you need to be very focused on that, and perhaps that requires phasing of what you're trying to do with this, because it's very comprehensive, and I think we're all kind of saying, wow, great, because we haven't done it that way. But breaking it into phases so that it's something that's doable in the short term and a long term is what we're trying to get very important. You guys are going to hear from me over and over again about making sure that people are involved. We are here to represent people, and that's translated as stakeholders. And you heard from them that we need stakeholders because they can give us guidance, especially on the definition of single-use packaging versus product. And those will make me very comfortable. I'm just going to lay off today because I'm really excited that we're starting to talk about it in the bigger sense. I have a coastal district. And I'm born and raised here in Southern California, so the ocean is precious. We all know that. We care so much about it. But let's do it right, because we're giving an agency total authority and a huge job at how long. It did take a long time, Senator Wachowski, for AB 32, but it wasn't a bad thing that we took the right amount of time, so we got good definitions. And they were not disputable at the agency level, so they had to have continual hearings and more people and all of the things that go on. We want people to be with us on this. And especially, I'm speaking for myself individually and the constituency I represent. I want them to be with me. And we have to look at what this does to our economy and to business. They've got to be a strong voice in this, and I think the partnership that they're all suggesting is something that I certainly embrace. So I will lay off today and hope when it hits my next committee, which would be approps, you have taken a long, hard look at the phasing and the definitions that I think are really important in this. Thank you.
Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Senators, thank you for your leadership. It was very timely considering the session we had before and learning about the scope of plastic pollution in our oceans. I share some of the same concerns as my colleague, our former leader in the state Senate. I'm concerned about definitions, especially packaging. I'm in the pharmaceutical business. Some packaging is very unique to some very sensitive products that need to be sterile when the beneficiaries, namely the surgeons, receive them. My compounding pharmacy actually puts together products that are kits that are used for surgical procedures. So the packaging is very, very unique. I have to say that I'm very concerned about giving so much authority to Cal Recycle to determine the regulations that are going to be needed, and I'm hoping that the legislature will have some oversight and codification and economic studies associated with some of those regulations, and certainly it's going to come at a significant cost to that agency that has demonstrated to have challenges in the past. I'm also concerned about the scoping period of time of a year. I think even the authors, by the way, they were kind of shaking their head, realize that a year is an awfully overzealous period of time when you consider how long it took for the AB 32 scoping to come about, and this is probably going to be as comprehensive as that. So the last thing I want to suggest is that the stakeholders, really need a seat at the table, and I really want to support your bill. But I also want to make sure that the stakeholders that represent some very important products, represent a lot of manufacturing jobs in the state of California, that we're not going to be putting them out of business without having them have the opportunity to sit down and share their concerns and maybe extend some timelines so that they can, in fact, take some of these single-use items that are not recyclable at this time and maybe find ways to recycle them, especially when the embargo to not send anything over to China exists. So I look forward to the definitions. I look forward to the stakeholders hopefully becoming more involved and being part of the solution. And I, like my colleague, will lay off at this point in time. And I hope to see some significant progress because I really think the work that you're doing is important.
Senator Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the legislation, especially after what we've learned all morning. It's phenomenal. And I'm happy to support it and want to move it forward. I just remember, and my colleague mentioned AB 32, and I remember when I was on CARB and we were doing the scoping plan back 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when we started it, and some of the issues that came to light were those of, timelines and how do we establish and meet those timelines, whether through regulation or through legislation. And a lot of it is done, kind of technology forcing. And I guess my only concern and issue that I hope you look at as it moves forward is are these timelines realistic? Can the technology be there? Can industry do it? I want to make sure we get there and we can do it in that timeline, but I also want to be realistic with it as well. So that's a concern I have. And with that, I'll make the motion to move the
Chair
bill.
recognizes the motion by Senator Hill. Co-authors, would you like to close?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for the great discussion. I want to thank all the advocates as well on both sides who came in and participated. Very, very valuable feedback. Let me just address some of the concerns that have been raised. First of all, to Senator Stone, where'd he go? Oh, he's already out. Okay, I'll wait for him to come back. Well, since hopefully he will hear from afar. We actually do specifically exempt medical devices, and that's on page 6 of your bill on line 29. There's also language specifically referring to the convening of a stakeholder group to assist the department in developing the plan, and that's on page 7. So that we can certainly talk about. If folks, if there's a serious concern about 1 year scoping plan, I mean, we can talk about 2 years to get the scoping plan. I don't think that would harm the core goal of the bill while also addressing the kind of the time frame issues that have been raised. But the key thing I need to mention in response to your comments, Senator, is that this bill includes a 10-year ramp up, and I know that I've met with industry folks who've really appreciated that. It really does recognize that it will take some time to think through and develop the policies associated with this, and of course, a lot of the advocates say that's far too long given the the urgency of the problems here. But we really do want to make sure this is something that is workable. I mean, ultimately, guys, this is not just about waste reduction in California, right? It's about waste reduction globally, and it's about trying to show the world that we can do this right. We can find a way to be economically viable and do right by our environment and help to show the rest of the world that there is a better way of addressing these packaging challenges that we all have as a human species. So it is very important to us that this be done in a way that actually is very functional with regards to our economic vitality and quality of life. I just wanted to mention, Senator Stone, that medical devices are specifically exempted from this on page 6 of the bill, and there also is a stakeholder process that's outlined on page 7, and we were talking about how there's a 10-year ramp-up associated with the general implementation of the bill. So I hope that those will address some of the concerns, and we can certainly talk about other things like expanding the time toward the release of the scoping plan, maybe to 2 years. I mean, those are absolutely conversations we're willing and able and happy to have with the senators. But I'd love my colleagues to add in and weigh in.
I just ask that you support the bill, and I think Senator Allen did a good close.
Please call the roll. The motion is to pass to
to the Senate Appropriations Committee.
appropriations. There's a motion by Senator Hill. Please call the roll.
Item number 3, SB 54 by Senator Allen. The motion is due pass to the Senate Appropriations Committee. Allen.
Aye.
Allen, aye. Bates. Hill.
Aye.
Hill, aye. Skinner.
Aye.
Skinner, aye. Stern.
Aye.
Stern, aye. Stone. Wykowski.
Aye.
Wykowski, aye.
Well, thank you so much, members, and thank you, everybody, for your participation in the discussion. And really, the vote count is 5-0, so that is we'll close the roll on that, but really do appreciate the very vital issue, and thanks to the staff also for helping to pull together a great hearing this morning. Okay, so let's now take a moment to turn to SB 200. This is Bill Monning's bill. This is item 5 in your agendas, and Senator Monning will be presenting SB 200, the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. We appreciate your being here, and thank you. Senator Monning, you may proceed. It's really great. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Here to present Senate Bill 200. The beginning of the 2019 legislative session marks the third consecutive year that community members from all over California have traveled to the Capitol to ask that we help them attain one basic right, a human right, the right to have access to affordable and clean, safe drinking water. The legislature has already established that the right to access safe drinking water is a human right. Yet there are close to 1 million of our neighbors and constituents who live each day without the ability to drink the water coming out of their taps. Here in the world's 5th largest economy, where we boast thriving tech industries, high-quality health care, and progressive social programs, we still have families in over 300 communities from the Oregon border to the Mexican border who are forced to buy bottled water to drink, bathe, and cook with. The State Water Resources Control Board has long called for the creation of a sustainable funding source to address the long-standing gaps in funding for safe drinking water needs that cannot be funded through existing bond funds. Senate Bill 200 takes an important first step in reaching that goal by creating the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund under the administration of the State Water Board. While the legislation before you today does not identify a specific funding source that will solve the drinking water crisis, it does create a needed framework for the State Water Board to receive, administer, and distribute revenue in a responsible, cost-effective manner that will prioritize solutions for those Californians most impacted by unsafe and unaffordable drinking water. While discussions on how to establish a long-term and sustainable funding source for safe drinking water are ongoing, Senate Bill 200 is a critical part in establishing the structure and framework needed to get funds to the communities that need them the most. Mr. Chair, members, I respectfully ask that you join me in this important first step toward finally realizing the human right to clean water in California and vote aye on SB 200. And Mr. Chair, I have 2 witnesses with me today. First, Michael Claiborne, a senior attorney with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. He'll be followed by Maria Dolores Diaz. She's a community member from Cantua Creek, California. Thank
Fantastic. Thank you, Senator. And I just want to say before you go on to your witnesses, for folks to recognize, the staff analysis notes that there are some concerns about funds being continuously appropriated and also lack of legislative oversight. And as the bill moves forward, and I certainly anticipate that it will, committee staff is very happy to work with your office on creating some additional language, for the bill to preserve legislative oversight of these activities. And I think that's something that you care about.
Yes, and I appreciate that. Fully committed to continuing to work together. Should we succeed today, I think it will go to natural resources and water, and we can continue to collaborate with Chair Stern and Chair Allen in addressing those concerns and work with your staff. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Senator, and you may proceed with your witnesses.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Claiborne. I'm a senior attorney with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, which is an environmental and social justice nonprofit based in Fresno. We work in the San Joaquin Valley and the East Coachella Valley, and we're here today standing alongside impacted residents to express support for SB 200 and the establishment of a safe and affordable drinking water fund, which will provide the framework for drinking water solutions to effectuate the promise of the human right to water. We want to start by thanking Senator Monning for his efforts to champion drinking water solutions, particularly over the last 3 years, starting with SB 623 in 2017. The last several years have gone a long way to establishing a consensus that there is a drinking water crisis in this state. In 2019, approximately 1 million Californians lack access to safe and affordable drinking water, and there are currently more than 300 community water systems that are out of compliance with a primary drinking water standard. This is absolutely unacceptable in 2019. Additionally, there are nearly 2 million people in the state that are not served by community water systems. These are households, schools, communities served by private wells and state small water systems. A significant portion of these wells, we know, are contaminated and don't provide safe drinking water. The solution, which Senator Monning has outlined, is clear. The state must establish a permanent and reliable funding source that can be used for capital projects and operations and maintenance to fund drinking water solutions in our communities. The fund must be adequate to address the extensive need within the state, which analyses have showed is approximately $140 million a year. SB 200 would create a safe and affordable drinking water fund to address this need for a permanent and reliable source of funding. We look forward to working with the author, community leaders, stakeholders, the legislature, and the governor to pass a safe and affordable drinking water fund this year and urge support for SB 200. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos. Muchas gracias por su atención. Mi nombre es María Dolores Díaz. Yo vengo de una pequeña comunidad de Cantúa Creek, Tres Piedras. Represento allí a mis compañeras, a mis vecinos y amistades. Voy a traducir ahora.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for your attention and your time today. My name is Maria Dolores Diaz. I'm here representing my small community of Cantua Creek, Three Rocks, and surrounding areas in Fresno County.
Quiero decirles que a quien represento, ellos y yo apoyamos la propuesta SB 200.
I would like to say that, including myself, my community, and my friends, we all support SB 200.
Tenemos años pidiendo agua limpia y accesible y hasta hoy pues no hemos tenido una respuesta.
We have been asking for clean and affordable drinking water for many years, and we have not seen any timely results.
Y pues les digo algunas de mis razones.
I'm going to explain a few of the reasons I support SB 200 today.
Primero, pues por humanidad, pues no somos animales para consumir un agua sucia y contaminada.
First off, I would like to point out there's a sense of humanity. We are not animals, we're humans, and we do not deserve to be drinking contaminated water.
Segundo, por higiene, por nuestras propias familias, de las que allí vivimos, y sobre todo por nuestros niños. Ellos no entienden que es agua sucia.
I would also like to point out that for hygienic reasons, and for the folks that I live with, and most of all the children that are also around contaminated water.
Tercero, por salud. Nuestra salud está peligrando con esa agua contaminada que nos suministran.
I would also like to point out that health, we are drinking contaminated water that's putting our health in danger.
Y cuarto, por derecho, porque tenemos el derecho, todo el derecho, porque mes con mes pagamos ahorita 70, pero ya en el verano subió hasta 100 el cobro del agua.
And finally, because we have the human right to water, we're paying from $70 to, in the summers, sometimes over $100 for water that is contaminated, and we do not deserve that. Okay, and she brought her water bill, if anybody would like to see it. Yeah, see.
Okay. There we go. Yeah. Not the utilities.
No, she said you made her a little nervous.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Este es el de las taxas.
Sí. So, ya lo último.
Sí, y es por eso, y pues algunas otras razones, ¿verdad? Que yo digo que tenemos el derecho a un agua potable, limpia, accesible, y que no nos cobren bastante.
And for those reasons and many more, that's why we support SB 200. We want clean, affordable, and accessible water that we're not paying a lot of money for.
Muchas gracias por su atención.
Muchas gracias por
Thank
su
you so much
testimonio.
for your attention.
Muchas gracias, señora, y muchas gracias por su advocacia también. Okay, muy bien. Let's now go to the other folks who want to add on and support.
Thank you, Chair and members. Jonathan Nelson on behalf of the Community Water Center in support. With us here today are impacted Californians who are fighting for access to safe drinking water and for their basic human right to water. We thank Senator Manning for his championing of this important issue. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Erica Mendoza, and the reason I'm here, I support safety drinking water as a human.
Mi nombre es Nidia Medina y apoyo.
Mi nombre es Pedro Cáceres y apoyo.
Apoyo means support. So they're all in support. Yeah.
Mi nombre es Benedicto Cáceres y apoyo el Fondo Sostenible.
Gracias.
Mi nombre es Felipe González y apoyo.
Mi nombre es Marta Curiel y yo vengo a apoyar y a pedirle su apoyo para tener agua limpia.
Muchas gracias.
Buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por su atención. Mi nombre es Julia Mendoza.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your attention. My name is Julia Mendoza.
Les agradezco mucho por esa atención que le han tomado a mi compañera que venimos de la comunidad de Cantúa Creek al oeste de Fresno.
Thank you for your time listening to my neighbor who is speaking from Cantua Creek, which is also where I'm from, west of Fresno.
A nombre de mi comunidad vengo a decirles que estamos dispuestos a pagar el aumento de los 95 centavos en el bill por un agua limpia.
And on behalf of my community, I'm here to say that we are willing to contribute to the fund through a 75 to 95 cent a month water user fee in order to get clean and safe water.
Como dice mi comunidad, votamos por ustedes porque ustedes son las personas que pueden apoyarnos a nosotros porque son personas profesionales para tomar muy buenas decisiones y tienen esa humanidad para sentir esas necesidades que nosotros tenemos, pagamos porque nos den y les pedimos que toquen su corazón y nos den agua limpia y apoyen esta propuesta. Gracias.
We're here speaking to you today because you all are who makes decisions that affect us, and so we know that from the humanity that you have and from the bottom of your hearts that you will take us into consideration in giving us clean, safe, and affordable water.
Okay. Muchas gracias. Pero debo decir que pedimos a la gente que pues nos den sus nombres y su apoyo, pero tenemos mucha gente y...
Disculpe.
Sí, pero muchas gracias y nuestra comisión está sugiriendo un apoyo a esta propuesta de ley. Gracias. No, pero gracias. ¿Ah? Yeah. ¿Sí? Oh, sí, ¿de dónde son? Sí.
Ok, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Marcelene Villagómez. Vengo de Bakersfield, California. Vengo a apoyar al CB 200.